The silent treatment. Silence can be more devastating than any insult. When someone uses the silent treatment, they weaponize your need for connection. You're left hanging, desperate for any response, replaying every conversation in your mind. What did I do wrong? Should I apologize? The manipulator knows this. They watch you squirm, knowing that with every passing hour of silence, you become more willing to do whatever it takes to restore communication. The trick works because humans are social creatures. We need acknowledgement. We need to be seen. When someone suddenly withdraws all interaction, it triggers a primal panic. Your brain interprets it as social death. And the longer the silence stretches, the more power shifts to the person withholding communication. They're training you like a lab animal. Respond correctly and you get attention. Step out of line and you get punished with absence. The worst part is that it leaves no visible bruise, no concrete evidence. You can't point to silence as abuse. You start to doubt yourself, wondering if you're overreacting. That's exactly what they want. Strategic incompetence. Watch someone suddenly become helpless the moment they need to do something they don't want to do. They burn the dinner just badly enough that you never ask them to cook again. They make such a mess of the laundry that you take over permanently. They pretend they don't understand how to use the dishwasher despite operating far more complex technology every single day. This is strategic incompetence, and it's brilliant in its simplicity. The manipulator gets exactly what they want by pretending to be terrible at what they don't want to do. You step in, frustrated but resigned, taking on the burden yourself. And they've won without ever having to argue or refuse directly. The genius of this trick lies in its plausible deniability. They can claim they're just not good at certain things, that they tried their best. Meanwhile, you're drowning in responsibilities while they coast along, perfectly competent in the areas they care about. Over time, the division of labor becomes so lopsided that you're doing everything while they do nothing. And if you complain, they act hurt, defensive. I'm just not as capable as you. That statement sounds humble, but it's actually a trap. Accept it, and you accept a permanent imbalance, moving the goalposts. You finally achieve what they asked for. You worked hard, met the deadline, did exactly what was required. But instead of acknowledgement, they shift the target. Well, yes, but I actually meant this other thing. Or, that's good, but it would have been better if you'd also done this. The goalposts have moved. What was once success is now redefined as failure. This trick keeps victims in a state of perpetual inadequacy. No matter how hard they try, they can never quite succeed because the definition of success keeps changing. It's psychological quicksand. The more effort you put in, the deeper you sink. Abusive managers use this constantly. Employees work overtime, sacrifice weekends, push themselves to exhaustion, only to be told they still haven't done enough. Toxic partners do it too. Promise to change one behavior, and suddenly they're criticizing something completely different. The goal isn't actually improvement. The goal is control. By ensuring you never reach the finish line, they ensure you never stop trying to please them. You remain trapped in an endless cycle of striving, always falling just short, always believing that maybe next time will be different. It never is. Word salad. You're trying to have a straightforward conversation. You ask a simple question, but instead of a clear answer, you get a tangled mess of contradictions, deflections, and irrelevant tangents. By the time they finish talking, you've completely forgotten what you originally asked. This is word salad, a manipulation tactic that uses confusion as a weapon. The person isn't misunderstanding you. They're deliberately muddying the waters, making it impossible to pin them down on anything concrete. Politicians do this masterfully. Ask them a yes or no question, and you get 3 minutes of circular reasoning that says everything and nothing. By the end, you're exhausted, disoriented, and they've escaped accountability entirely. In personal relationships, word salad serves another purpose. It makes you doubt your own clarity of thought. You started the conversation feeling certain about something, but after being bombarded with convoluted explanations, you're no longer sure what you think or what you wanted to say. The manipulator has successfully derailed your attempt at confrontation. They've turned the tables, making you feel like you're the one who isn't making sense. And once you're confused and doubting yourself, they can reshape the narrative however they want. Love withdrawal. They were affectionate yesterday, warm, attentive, loving. But today, suddenly, they're cold, distant. When you try to connect, they turn away. No explanation, no warning. You're left frantically trying to figure out what changed. This is love withdrawal, and it's one of the cruelest forms of emotional manipulation. The trick works because it creates unpredictability. When affection is given freely and consistently, you feel secure. But when it's randomly withdrawn, you become anxious, constantly scanning for signs of approval or rejection. You start modifying your behavior, trying desperately to restore the warmth. The manipulator has trained you to work for love. It's no longer freely given. It's conditional, contingent on your compliance. And because they never tell you exactly what caused the withdrawal, you're left guessing. Maybe it was something you said. Maybe it was your tone. Maybe you didn't show enough appreciation. You start walking on eggshells, overanalyzing every interaction, sacrificing your authenticity for the hope of restoring their affection. The sickest part? When they finally give you warmth again, you feel overwhelming relief and gratitude. You're grateful for receiving what should have been yours all along. And that gratitude bonds you even tighter to your manipulator. Manufactured jealousy. They casually mention how attractive someone else is. They bring up an ex just a little too often. They laugh too hard at someone else's jokes. None of it crosses an obvious line, but all of it makes you uncomfortable. That's the point. Manufactured jealousy is about keeping you off balance, insecure, and competing for attention. When you feel threatened by potential rivals, you try harder. You become more accommodating, more willing to overlook red flags, more desperate to prove you're worthy of their exclusive attention. The manipulator benefits from your insecurity. You police yourself, shrink yourself, do whatever it takes to remain their primary focus. And if you ever complain about their behavior, they'll act shocked. I was just being friendly. You're being paranoid. Now you're not just insecure, you're also unreasonable. The manipulation has doubled. Not only are you competing for their attention, but you're also being made to feel guilty for having normal emotional responses to their provocations. Over time, this tactic erodes your self-esteem. You start to believe you're not enough, that you need to constantly earn their loyalty. Meanwhile, they sit back and enjoy the power of having someone so desperate to please them. Selective memory. You remember the conversation clearly. They promise something specific, but when you bring it up later, they look at you blankly. I never said that. You must be confused. They're so confident in their denial that you start to question your own memory. Maybe you misheard. Maybe you're remembering it wrong. This is selective memory, and it's a form of gaslighting. The manipulator deliberately denies things they said or did, forcing you to doubt your own perception of reality. Over time, this creates profound psychological damage. You stop trusting your own mind. You second-guess everything, constantly seeking external validation for what you remember. The manipulator gains complete control over the narrative. Truth becomes whatever they say it is because your memory, your reality, has been deemed unreliable. The truly sinister aspect of this trick is that it's often combined with occasional admissions. Sometimes they'll acknowledge something, letting you feel a moment of validation, but most of the time they deny, creating just enough uncertainty that you never fully trust yourself again. You become dependent on them to tell you what's real and what isn't. Your grip on reality loosens, and their control tightens. Intermittent reinforcement. Sometimes they're wonderful, kind, attentive, everything you've ever wanted. But those moments are rare and unpredictable. Most of the time, they're indifferent or cruel. But you keep hoping, keep trying, because you remember those good moments and you're desperate to experience them again. This is intermittent reinforcement, and it's the same psychological principle that makes gambling addictive. Slot machines don't pay out every time. They pay out just often enough to keep you pulling the lever, convinced that the next pull might be the big win. In relationships, intermittent reinforcement creates powerful trauma bonds. The unpredictability of kindness makes it more valuable, more intoxicating. When you don't know when the next moment of warmth will come, you become hypervigilant, constantly seeking clues, modifying your behavior in hopes of triggering their approval. The manipulator doesn't even have to be kind very often. A few moments of tenderness scattered among weeks of coldness are enough to keep you hooked. You'll endure incredible amounts of mistreatment for those brief glimpses of the person you fell in love with. The tragic irony is that consistent cruelty would be easier to walk away from. It's the occasional kindness that traps you, playing victim. No matter what they did, somehow they're the injured party. You brought up a legitimate grievance, but within minutes, they've turned the conversation around. Now you're comforting them, apologizing, reassuring them that you still care. Your original concern has been completely buried. This is playing victim, and it's a masterful deflection technique. The manipulator short-circuits your attempt at confrontation by claiming they're the one who's been hurt. Maybe they cry. Maybe they bring up past traumas. Maybe they accuse you of being cruel for even bringing it up. Whatever the method, the result is the same. You abandon your needs to tend to theirs. The trick works because most people have empathy. When we see someone in pain, we instinctively want to help. The manipulator exploits this, weaponizing your compassion against you. They know that if they can make themselves appear vulnerable enough, you'll back down every single time. Over years of this pattern, you stop bringing up problems entirely. It's not worth it. Every attempt to address an issue somehow ends with you being the bad guy. So you swallow your hurt, accept mistreatment, and watch as the manipulator continues to harm you while painting themselves as the victim of your cruelty. Future faking. They paint beautiful pictures of tomorrow. The trips you'll take together, the house you'll buy, the life you'll build. The future they describe is so compelling, so detailed, that you can almost taste it. So you invest. You sacrifice now for that promise later. But later never comes. There's always a reason to delay, a new obstacle that pushes the timeline back. This is future faking, a manipulation tactic that uses false promises to maintain control. The manipulator knows you won't tolerate the present if you see it clearly, so they direct your gaze forward, keeping you focused on a horizon that's always receding. You endure bad treatment now because you believe it's temporary. You accept less than you deserve because you're convinced things will get better. The manipulator benefits from your patience, your investment, your continued presence, without ever having to deliver on their promises. Years can pass this way. You look back and realize you've been waiting for a future that was never real, sacrificing your present for a fantasy. By the time you recognize the pattern, you've already lost so much time that walking away feels like admitting those years were wasted. So some people stay even longer, trapped by sunk cost, crazy making. You said something, you know you did, but they're insisting you didn't. Or you didn't say it that way. Or you said the opposite. They're so calm, so reasonable in their contradiction that you start to feel hysterical for insisting on your version of events. This is crazy making, a deliberate tactic to undermine your sanity. The manipulator systematically denies, distorts, and rewrites reality until you genuinely start to doubt your own mind. They might move your belongings and then act confused when you can't find them. They might agree to plans and then claim you never made them. They might say hurtful things and then insist they said something completely different. The effect is cumulative. One instance you can brush off, but dozens, hundreds of these reality distortions add up. You stop trusting your own perceptions. You become dependent on the manipulator to tell you what's real. This is the ultimate form of control. Once someone controls your sense of reality itself, they control you completely. You can't leave because you no longer trust your own judgment about whether you should. You can't seek help because you're not even sure if the problem is real or if you're just crazy like they keep suggesting. Ambient abuse. There's no single big incident you can point to, just 1,000 tiny cuts. A dismissive tone here, a rolled eye there, a slight that could be explained away as accidental. Separately, each incident seems too small to complain about, but together, they create an atmosphere of constant belittlement. This is ambient abuse, and it's devastatingly effective precisely because it's so hard to identify. You can't point to one clear moment and say, that was abusive. Instead, you just feel increasingly small, increasingly worthless, without being able to articulate exactly why. The manipulator maintains plausible deniability at every turn. If you object to the eye roll, you're being oversensitive. If you mention the dismissive tone, you're reading too much into things. They can paint you as unreasonable, paranoid, someone who manufactures problems where none exist. Meanwhile, the death by 1,000 cuts continues. Your self-esteem erodes so gradually you barely notice. You just wake up one day and realize you've become a shadow of who you used to be, and you can't even explain to yourself or anyone else exactly how it happened. That's the genius of ambient abuse. It destroys you invisibly. Information control. They decide what you're allowed to know. They read your messages, monitor your calls, track your movements. They justify it as concern, as love, as wanting to keep you safe. But really, it's about control. When someone controls your access to information, they control your reality. They can isolate you from contradictory viewpoints, from people who might open your eyes to the manipulation. They curate what you see, hear, and know, creating a bubble where their version of truth is the only one that exists. In cults, this is achieved through physical isolation. Members are cut off from outside media, from family, from anyone who might challenge the leader's narrative. In personal relationships, it's more subtle. The manipulator discourages certain friendships, criticizes family members, suggests that your support system is toxic or has bad intentions. Gradually, your world shrinks. Your only source of information becomes the manipulator themselves. And once they're your sole interpreter of reality, they can tell you anything. You have no way to verify, no external perspective to challenge their claims. You exist in a reality they've constructed, believing it's the truth because you have no access to alternatives. Erosion of boundaries. The first time they crossed a boundary, you protested. They apologized, maybe made excuses, but ultimately backed off. You felt heard. But then it happened again and again. Each time you protest, each time they push back a little harder. Your boundaries become negotiations rather than firm limits. This is erosion of boundaries, and it happens so gradually you barely notice. Today, they show up unannounced when you asked for space. Tomorrow, they make decisions for you without asking. Next week, they're accessing your accounts because we shouldn't have secrets. Each violation is small enough that making a big deal out of it seems unreasonable. The manipulator is counting on this. They know that people are more likely to tolerate boundary violations when they come in small increments. By the time you realize your boundaries have been completely demolished, you've been complicit in their destruction. Every time you let a small violation slide, you taught them that your boundaries weren't real. The truly insidious part is that the manipulator then uses your previous compliance against you. You didn't mind before when I did this. Why is it suddenly a problem now? Your past failure to enforce boundaries becomes evidence that you never really had them in the first place. Splitting. Yesterday, you could do no wrong. They praised you, admired you, put you on a pedestal. But today, you're the worst person in the world. Worthless, stupid, a disappointment. Nothing changed about you, but everything changed about how they see you. This is splitting, a defense mechanism that becomes a manipulation tool. The person cannot hold complexity. You're either all good or all bad, with no middle ground. For the victim, this is psychologically exhausting. You never know which version of you will greet them. You walk on eggshells, trying desperately to stay in the good category, terrified of the switch that could happen at any moment for any reason. The manipulator benefits from your fear. When you're always one mistake away from being completely devalued, you try much harder to please. You accept mistreatment during your bad phase because you're hoping to earn your way back to their good graces. And when you're being idealized, you're so relieved, so grateful, that you ignore warning signs and red flags. The whiplash between idealization and devaluation creates powerful trauma bonds. You're addicted to the highs, desperate to avoid the lows, and completely controlled by the person who determines which version of reality you're living in at any given moment. Proxy recruitment. They turn others against you. They share carefully edited versions of your conflicts, painting themselves as the reasonable one and you as unstable, unreasonable, perhaps even abusive. They recruit allies, people who now view you through the lens of the manipulator's narrative. This is proxy recruitment, and it serves multiple purposes. First, it isolates you. When mutual friends start treating you differently, you lose your support system. Second, it validates the manipulator. If multiple people agree with their version of events, it must be true, right? Third, it makes you doubt yourself. If everyone else thinks you're the problem, maybe you are. The manipulator doesn't even have to maintain the facade all the time. They've outsourced that job to their recruits, who will defend them, make excuses for them, and gaslight you on their behalf. You're not fighting one person anymore. You're fighting an entire social network that's been weaponized against you. The cruelest aspect is that these recruits often genuinely believe they're helping. They've been fed a false narrative so compelling that they truly think you're the villain. They have no idea they're being used as pawns in someone else's psychological warfare. And you can't explain it to them without sounding exactly like the unstable person the manipulator claimed you were. Manufactured chaos. Things were calm, stable. You were starting to feel secure. Then suddenly, there's a crisis. Drama erupts from nowhere. The manipulator is at the center of it, and you're pulled into dealing with the fallout. Just as that crisis resolves, another appears, and another. You never get a chance to catch your breath, to think clearly, to examine the relationship objectively. This is manufactured chaos, and it's intentional. The manipulator creates constant turbulence because chaos serves their purposes. When you're always in crisis mode, you're operating on survival instinct, not rational thought. You don't have the mental space to question whether the relationship is healthy or to plan an exit. You're too busy putting out fires. Additionally, manufactured chaos creates dependency. The manipulator often positions themselves as the solution to problems they secretly created. You turn to them for support, for guidance, for stability, never realizing they're the source of the instability. The chaos also provides cover for their bad behavior. In the midst of crisis, smaller transgressions go unnoticed or unaddressed. You're too overwhelmed to deal with them. By the time things calm down enough for you to catch your breath, new chaos has erupted and the cycle continues. False equivalence. You bring up something they did that hurt you. It was significant, harmful, perhaps even objectively wrong. But instead of acknowledging it, they bring up something you did. Something minor, perhaps something from years ago, perhaps something completely unrelated. But they present it as if the two things are equivalent. This is false equivalence, and it's a deflection masterpiece. By equating their significant transgression with your minor mistake, they avoid accountability while simultaneously putting you on the defensive. Now, instead of them apologizing, you're both apologizing, as if you're equally at fault. The conversation becomes about fairness rather than about the actual harm they caused. You find yourself defending your small mistake, explaining context, trying to show why the two situations aren't comparable. Meanwhile, the original issue has been buried. The manipulator has successfully redirected attention away from their behavior and onto yours. Even worse, false equivalence creates a narrative of mutual fault. To outsiders, to yourself even, it starts to look like you're both just flawed people hurting each other. The reality that one person's harm is significantly greater than the other's gets obscured. It becomes, he said, she said, both sides, we're all doing our best. The manipulator escapes judgment while you carry equal blame for unequal wrongs. Performative remorse. They've hurt you again. You're upset, rightfully so. And then come the tears, the apologies, the dramatic displays of guilt. They seem so genuinely remorseful that you can't help but soften. They promise to change. They might even change temporarily, but the pattern repeats. This is performative remorse, and it's designed to disarm your anger without requiring actual change. The manipulator has learned that appearing sorry is enough to get forgiveness, enough to buy more time, enough to reset your boundaries. They've weaponized your compassion. The performance can be incredibly convincing. Crying, self-flagellation, dramatic statements like, I don't deserve you, or I'm such a terrible person. These displays trigger your empathy. You end up comforting them, reassuring them, minimizing your own hurt to make them feel better about hurting you. The truly diabolical aspect is that performative remorse often feels more satisfying in the moment than genuine accountability would. It's emotional, dramatic, intense. It creates the illusion of deep connection, of being understood. But words without changed behavior are just manipulation. And the manipulator knows that as long as they can perform remorse convincingly enough, they never actually have to stop doing the things they're supposedly sorry for. Your forgiveness becomes a renewable resource they can exploit indefinitely. Conditional affection. Their love for you comes with requirements. You must look a certain way, act a certain way, achieve certain things. When you meet the conditions, affection flows freely, but the moment you fall short, it's withdrawn. You're not loved for who you are. You're loved for who you can be when you're meeting their standards. This is conditional affection, and it creates a perpetual state of insecurity. You never quite feel safe because love can evaporate at any moment if you fail to maintain the conditions. The manipulator sets the bar, and they can raise it whenever they want. What was acceptable yesterday might not be acceptable today. You're constantly striving, constantly proving yourself, constantly earning what should be freely given. Children who grow up with conditional affection become adults who believe love must be earned through perfection. They become high achievers who never feel good enough, people pleasers who sacrifice their authentic selves to maintain relationships. The psychological damage is profound and lasting. In adult relationships, conditional affection looks like someone who loves you when you're successful, attractive, agreeable. But the moment you show weakness, gain weight, disagree with them, their warmth disappears. You learn to hide your struggles, to present only the acceptable version of yourself, to exist in a constant state of performance. That's not love. That's conditional tolerance, and it slowly kills your soul. Weaponized incompetence. They're perfectly capable of handling complex tasks at work, managing their hobbies, navigating technology. But when it comes to household chores or emotional labor, suddenly they're helpless. They load the dishwasher wrong so many times that you take over. They forget important dates despite remembering every sports statistic. They can't figure out how to make a doctor's appointment despite managing business calls all day. This is weaponized incompetence, and it's a passive-aggressive way to avoid responsibility. The manipulator isn't actually incapable. They're pretending to be so that you'll stop asking them to contribute. And it works. Eventually, it's easier to just do everything yourself than to deal with their supposed inability. The insidious part is that they often mix real effort with strategic failure. They'll do just enough to claim they're trying, but mess up badly enough that you don't ask again. Over time, you end up carrying the entire mental load of running a household or maintaining a relationship while they coast along, contributing minimally while maintaining the excuse of incompetence. When you complain, they might even use it against you. I'm just not as good at this as you are. You're so much better at it. These statements sound like compliments, but are actually manipulation. They're making you responsible for their lack of contribution by framing your competence as the reason you should continue doing everything. It's a trap that leaves you exhausted, resentful, and unable to articulate why without sounding petty. Covert contracts. They do something nice for you. You didn't ask for it. You might not even want it, but they did it anyway, and now there's an unspoken expectation that you owe them something in return. When you don't reciprocate in the way they expected, they're hurt, angry, resentful. You violated a contract you never agreed to, one you didn't even know existed. This is the covert contract, and it's a manipulative way to create obligation. The person does favors, makes sacrifices, goes out of their way, all while mentally keeping score. But they never communicate their expectations. They just assume you should know what they want in return. When you inevitably fail to deliver on terms you never agreed to, they can claim you're ungrateful, selfish, uncaring. You find yourself in debt you didn't knowingly incur. The manipulator acts like a martyr, citing all the things they've done for you as evidence of your failure to reciprocate. But healthy relationships don't operate on covert contracts. If someone does something for you, it should be because they want to, not because they're building a case for future leverage. The moment someone brings up all they've done for you as a weapon, you know their kindness was never kindness at all. It was an investment they expected would pay dividends. And you're now being called in to pay a debt you never knew you owed. Minimization. You express hurt over something they did. Instead of acknowledging it, they downplay it. It wasn't that bad. You're overreacting. Other people have it worse. They systematically minimize your pain until you start to question whether you're entitled to feel hurt at all. This is minimization, and it's a way to avoid accountability by suggesting your feelings are disproportionate to the offense. The manipulator decides what counts as harmful and what doesn't. If they've decided something wasn't a big deal, then your feelings about it are wrong, excessive, unreasonable. You're not just hurt now, you're also wrong for being hurt. Over time, minimization teaches you to suppress your emotional responses. You stop trusting your own feelings. You start measuring your pain against arbitrary standards they've set. Is this worth being upset over? Will they tell me I'm overreacting again? You begin policing your own emotions, doing the work of invalidating yourself so they don't have to. The truly damaging aspect is that minimization is often combined with comparison. Other people have real problems. I went through worse and I didn't complain. By comparing your suffering to someone else's, they create a hierarchy of pain where yours never quite qualifies as significant enough to warrant attention. You learn that your feelings don't matter unless they're extreme, unless they meet some undefined threshold of severity. And by then, you're so damaged that you've forgotten how to feel at all. Testing loyalty. They create situations designed to test your loyalty. They might make unreasonable demands to see if you'll comply. They might share false information to see if you'll keep it confidential. They might manufacture conflict with your friends or family to see whose side you'll take. These aren't organic situations. They're carefully constructed tests designed to measure your devotion. This is loyalty testing, and it's about control disguised as relationship maintenance. The manipulator creates artificial scenarios that force you to prove your commitment, usually by sacrificing something else you value. Each test you pass raises the bar for the next one. You proved you'd skip a friend's wedding for them. Now will you skip your siblings? You proved you'd share their secrets. Now will you lie to protect them from consequences? The tests escalate until you're compromising your values, betraying others, isolating yourself, all to demonstrate your loyalty to someone who will never be satisfied. Because that's the insidious truth about loyalty tests. There's no passing grade that ends them. Each successful test just proves you're controllable, which means you'll be tested again. The manipulator learns your limits and systematically pushes against them. They're not testing loyalty. They're training obedience. And every time you pass one of their tests, you fail a test of your own integrity. Strategic forgetting. They remember every small thing you did wrong. They'll bring up mistakes from years ago to use against you. But when it comes to their own transgressions, their memory becomes curiously selective. They genuinely seem to have forgotten the hurtful thing they said last week. They don't recall making that promise. They have no memory of the commitment they broke. This is strategic forgetting, and it creates an incredibly unbalanced dynamic. You're held accountable for everything you've ever done wrong, while they escape accountability by claiming they simply don't remember. The manipulation goes deeper than just avoiding responsibility. Strategic forgetting also allows them to rewrite history. If they don't remember events the way you do, and they're convinced their memory is correct, then your version of events becomes questionable. Combined with their perfect recall of your mistakes, it creates a narrative where you're the problematic one who keeps bringing up things that supposedly never happened or didn't happen the way you remember. You start to doubt your own memory. Maybe you are misremembering. Maybe you're holding on to grudges over things that weren't as bad as you thought. The manipulator's selective amnesia becomes a tool that shapes your perception of reality itself. You can't build accountability on a foundation of convenient forgetting, but that's exactly the point. Accountability is what they're avoiding. Seal-yawning. You make a statement. Maybe it's an opinion, maybe it's about your own experience, but they demand proof. Sources. Evidence. They ask question after question, each one framed as just trying to understand, just curious, just wanting to learn. But their questions are endless, and the goalpost keeps moving. No answer is ever sufficient. This is sealioning, a form of harassment disguised as polite discourse. The manipulator isn't actually trying to understand. They're trying to exhaust you, to make you do so much work justifying your position that you eventually give up. They maintain a facade of civility while absolutely refusing to accept anything you say. The trick is particularly effective because it makes the victim look unreasonable. After all, the sealioner is just asking questions. They're being so polite. If you get frustrated and snap, you're the one who looks bad. You're the one who can't handle simple inquiries. Meanwhile, they've successfully derailed the conversation, avoided any real engagement with your point, and positioned themselves as the reasonable one just trying to have a rational discussion. In personal relationships, sealining looks like someone who demands you explain and re-explain your feelings until you're so exhausted you drop the subject. At work, it's the colleague who turns every simple request into an interrogation. Online, it's the person filling your comments with bad faith questions designed not to enlighten but to frustrate. The key to recognizing sealioning is noticing the pattern. 1 or 2 questions are normal. An endless stream of demands for clarification is manipulation. Flying monkeys. You've established boundaries with someone toxic. You've reduced contact or cut them off entirely. But then mutual friends start reaching out. Have you talked to them? They're really hurt. I think you're being too hard on them. These people mean well. They don't realize they're being used as flying monkeys, a term from The Wizard of Oz referring to the witch's minions who did her bidding. The manipulator has sent them to wear you down, to make you feel guilty, to convince you to give the toxic person another chance. This is proxy manipulation at its finest. The manipulator maintains their victim status by sending others to plead their case. These flying monkeys often have no idea they're being manipulated themselves. They've been fed a carefully curated version of events that paints the manipulator as the injured party. They genuinely believe they're helping to heal a rift. What they don't know is that they're helping to perpetuate abuse. The challenge for the victim is that explaining the situation often makes them look bad. I cut them off because they're manipulative isn't convincing, especially when the flying monkeys have only seen the manipulator's charming side. Defending yourself requires sharing private, painful details, which you might not want to do. The manipulator is counting on this. They know social pressure is incredibly effective, especially when it comes from people you care about. Flying monkeys allow them to maintain pressure on you without having to contact you directly, technically respecting your boundaries while absolutely violating them through proxies. Darvo. You confront them about something harmful they did, but within minutes the conversation has completely reversed. Now, they're the victim. You're the aggressor. Your attempt to address their behavior has been reframed as an attack on them. They're defending themselves against your cruelty. How dare you accuse them of such things? Don't you know how much that hurts? This is DARVO, an acronym for Deny, Attack, Reverse Victim and Offender. It's a reaction pattern seen in perpetrators when confronted with their abuse. First, they deny the behavior or its impact. Then they attack you for bringing it up. Finally, they reverse the roles, claiming they're the victim of your false accusations, your cruelty, your refusal to just let things go. DARVO is devastatingly effective because it exploits empathy and confusion. Your natural response to someone claiming to be hurt is to back down, to comfort, to apologize. The manipulator knows this. By claiming victim status, they trigger your caretaking instincts. Suddenly, you're the one apologizing, the one feeling guilty, the one continuing to make amends. Your original grievance has been completely buried under their manufactured victimhood. The long-term effect of repeatedly experiencing DARVO is that victims stop bringing up issues at all. It's not worth it. Every attempt to address a problem results in somehow being made the villain. So they swallow their hurt, accept mistreatment, and watch as the person harming them successfully paints themselves as the injured party. Breadcrumbing. They give you just enough attention to keep you interested, but never enough to build anything real. A text every few days, a like on your social media, a vague mention of getting together sometime. You're kept in a state of perpetual hope, always waiting for more, always believing that this time they'll commit to making actual plans or having a real conversation. This is breadcrumbing, and it's about keeping someone on the hook without any real investment. The manipulator enjoys having you as an option. They like knowing you're there, available, interested, but they don't actually want a relationship with you. They just want the ego boost of your continued attention. The crumbs they drop are calculated. Just when you're about to give up, just when you're ready to move on, they send a message. They reach out. The timing is often perfect because they've been monitoring your engagement. They can tell when you're pulling away, and that's when they reel you back in with minimal effort. You deserve more than crumbs. But breadcrumbing is effective because it exploits hope. Each small piece of attention feels like proof that they're interested, that you just need to be patient, that eventually you'll get the full meal. But the meal never comes, just more crumbs, strategically placed to keep you following a trail that leads nowhere. Years can pass this way, with you waiting, hoping, settling for scraps of attention from someone who will never give you what you actually need. Negging. They give you a compliment, but there's a barb hidden inside it. You look good today. Did you finally start working out? Or, I love how you don't care what people think about your style. The statements seem positive on the surface, but carry an insult underneath. This is negging, a manipulation tactic designed to undermine your self-esteem while maintaining plausible deniability. If you object to the insult, the manipulator can claim you're being oversensitive. It was a compliment. I was trying to be nice, but you heard the insult. You felt it. The goal of negging is to keep you slightly off balance, slightly insecure, constantly seeking the speaker's approval. By mixing compliments with subtle put-downs, they create confusion. You never quite know where you stand. One moment they're building you up. The next they're tearing you down, always with a smile, always with the pretense of kindness. Pickup artists made negging famous as a technique to attract women by lowering their self-esteem, making them more susceptible to manipulation. But the tactic appears in all kinds of relationships. Toxic friends who always find the flaw in your achievements. Parents who praise you while simultaneously criticizing. Colleagues who compliment your work while implying it's not quite good enough. Over time, negging erodes confidence. You internalize the hidden insults, start to believe maybe you really aren't as good as you thought. And the more your self-esteem drops, the more power the manipulator has over you. You become grateful for their mixed compliments because you've been conditioned to believe you don't deserve better. Benching. You had something good, or at least you thought you did, but now they've gone quiet. Not completely disappeared, just faded into the background. They still interact occasionally, just enough to keep the connection alive, but they've clearly downgraded your importance in their life. You've been benched, kept as a backup option while they pursue other priorities. This is particularly painful because you're in limbo. You can't move on because they haven't actually ended things, but you can't move forward because they're not investing. You're frozen, waiting, hoping they'll bring you back into the main game. The manipulator benefits from keeping you benched. They don't have to commit to you, but they also don't lose access to you. You're there whenever they need validation, attention, or a fallback option if their primary pursuits don't work out. You've been relegated to convenience status. What makes benching particularly insidious is that it often happens slowly. You don't wake up one day and realize you've been benched. It's a gradual pulling away, so subtle that you keep making excuses for it. They're just busy. Things will get back to normal soon. But normal never returns because this is the new normal. You've been demoted, and the manipulator is perfectly comfortable with the arrangement. Breaking free from benching requires recognizing that you deserve better than being someone's backup plan. If someone wants you in their life, they'll make you a priority. If they've benched you, it's time to quit the team. Stonewalling. You're trying to have a conversation, an important one, but they've shut down completely. They're physically present, but emotionally absent. They won't make eye contact. They give one-word answers or none at all. The message is clear. This conversation is over because they've decided it is. This is stonewalling, and it's a particularly cruel form of manipulation. Unlike the silent treatment, which is obvious, stonewalling can happen while someone is technically engaging with you, but they've erected a wall, and nothing you say can penetrate it. The tactic serves multiple purposes. It avoids accountability. It punishes you for trying to address an issue. It demonstrates power by controlling whether communication happens at all. And it's devastatingly effective because you can't force someone to engage. You're left talking to a wall, becoming increasingly frustrated, perhaps even emotional, while they remain calm and detached. That contrast often gets used against you later. You were hysterical. I stayed calm. The narrative becomes about your overreaction rather than about the issue you were trying to discuss or their refusal to engage. Stonewalling is particularly damaging in relationships because connection requires communication. When one person can arbitrarily shut down communication, the relationship becomes a hostage situation. Important issues never get resolved. Resentments build. The victim learns that certain topics are forbidden simply because the stonewaller will refuse to discuss them. Power dynamics become severely imbalanced, with the stonewaller maintaining complete control over when, whether, and how difficult conversations happen. Loan sharking. They help you when you're in need. But that help comes with strings you don't see until later. The favor wasn't free. It was a loan, and they're calling it in. Sometimes the repayment demanded is far greater than the original help provided. You needed $50. But the emotional debt they claim you owe is astronomical. This is loan sharking in relationships, and it turns kindness into a weapon. The manipulator keeps a mental ledger of everything they've done for you. When they want something, they present the bill. Remember when I helped you move? Remember when I loaned you money? Remember when I was there for you? The implication is clear: you owe me. The problem is that their accounting is entirely one-sided. They remember every favor they did but conveniently forget everything you've done for them. Or they devalue your contributions while inflating their own. The ledger is always in their favor, and the debts never expire. Something they did for you years ago can still be leveraged today. Healthy relationships don't operate on transactional basis. People help each other because they care, not to build leverage. The moment someone starts itemizing their good deeds and demanding repayment, you know their kindness was never kindness at all. It was an investment in control. The cruelest aspect of emotional loan sharking is that it poisons generosity. You start to see every offer of help as a potential future obligation. You refuse assistance you genuinely need because you know it will be held over your head later. The manipulator has turned mutual support into a trap. Gaslighting by proxy. They don't just tell you your memory is wrong. They recruit others to confirm their version of events. Suddenly, multiple people are telling you that things didn't happen the way you remember. You must have misunderstood. You must be confused. With multiple voices echoing the same narrative, you start to doubt yourself even more powerfully than you would with just one person contradicting you. This is gaslighting by proxy, and it's gaslighting on steroids. The manipulator has enlisted allies, sometimes unwittingly, to participate in rewriting reality. These proxies might not even realize they're part of a manipulation scheme. The manipulator has told them their version of events, and they're simply confirming what they believe to be true. But from your perspective, you're now up against a consensus reality that contradicts your own experience. When one person tells you your memory is wrong, you can resist. But when multiple people say the same thing, the psychological pressure to conform is immense. You start thinking that maybe you really are the one who's mistaken. Maybe your perception is fundamentally flawed. This technique is particularly insidious in family systems where a manipulative parent might have convinced all the siblings that certain events never happened or happened differently. The victim finds themselves alone in their memory, facing a united front of family members who all insist on an alternative version of history. The isolation and self-doubt this creates can be psychologically devastating. Selective empathy. When they're going through something difficult, your empathy is demanded. Your time, your emotional labor, your support, all of it must be freely given. But when you need support, they're unavailable. Your problems are minimized, your feelings dismissed. They somehow can't muster the empathy for you that you're required to give them. This is selective empathy, and it creates a profoundly one-sided relationship. The manipulator has trained you to be their emotional support system while offering nothing in return. They might not even be aware they're doing it. Some people are so focused on their own experiences that they genuinely don't register others' needs, but the effect is the same regardless of intent. You've become a support provider without receiving support yourself. The imbalance takes a toll. You're exhausted from giving without receiving. You start to wonder if your feelings matter at all. And when you try to address the imbalance, the manipulator might react with hurt. I can't believe you're keeping score. I thought you cared about me. They reframe your completely reasonable need for reciprocity as selfishness. Over time, you learn not to bring your problems to them. You suffer in silence, continuing to support them while your own needs go unmet. The relationship becomes entirely about their emotional experiences. You're just a supporting character in their story, expected to prop them up while dealing with your own struggles alone. That's not a relationship. It's exploitation dressed up as friendship. Infantilization. They treat you like a child. They make decisions for you without consulting you. They explain things you already understand. They talk about you to others as if you're not there or incapable of speaking for yourself. This is infantilization. And it's about establishing a power dynamic where they're the capable adult and you're the incompetent child. The tactic undermines your autonomy and competence. By treating you as less capable than you are, they make themselves indispensable. You start to doubt your own judgment, thinking maybe they do know better. Maybe you do need them to make decisions for you. The manipulator benefits from your growing dependency. Infantilization appears in romantic relationships, where one partner controls all the finances, makes all the decisions, handles all the adult responsibilities while treating the other like they couldn't possibly manage these things. It appears in parent-child relationships that should have evolved but remain stuck in patterns where the adult child is still treated as helpless. It appears in workplace dynamics where someone undermines a colleague's competence to make themselves look more capable by comparison. The psychological damage is significant. Being treated as incompetent makes you feel incompetent. You stop trying to do things yourself because you've been conditioned to believe you'll fail. The manipulator's predictions become self-fulfilling, and all the while, they maintain the moral high ground, positioning themselves as the generous, patient person dealing with your inadequacy. You should be grateful they're willing to help someone as incapable as you. That gratitude keeps you trapped. Unfavorable comparisons. They're always comparing you to others. Their ex was more attentive. Their friend is more successful. Their coworker is funnier. The message is clear, you're lacking in comparison to these other people. This is the tactic of unfavorable comparison, designed to keep you insecure and striving. The manipulator benefits from your insecurity in multiple ways. You try harder to please them, accepting less than you deserve because you believe you're lucky, they're settling for inferior you. You're less likely to leave because you've been convinced no one else would want you. You tolerate mistreatment because you believe you're not good enough to demand better. The comparisons are often carefully chosen. The traits they highlight in others might be things you can never achieve, ensuring you'll always fall short. Or they might praise characteristics in others that directly contradict what they previously told you they valued, creating confusion about what you should even be striving for. The goalpost moves, but you're always on the losing side. What makes this particularly cruel is that it poisons your relationships with the people you're being compared to. You might resent the ex you're constantly measured against. You might feel competitive with friends who are held up as examples of what you should be. The manipulator has turned your social circle into a minefield of insecurity. Healthy partners build you up. They appreciate what makes you unique rather than constantly pointing out how you fall short of others. If someone is regularly making you feel inadequate through comparison, they're not trying to motivate you to improve. They're trying to control you through insecurity. Revisionist history. The past isn't fixed when you're dealing with someone who practices revisionist history. What happened last month gets rewritten to suit their current narrative. An argument where they were clearly at fault gets retold as your overreaction. A promise they made disappears from their version of events. Over time, you have entirely different memories of your shared history. The manipulator controls the narrative by constantly rewriting it. When the past is unstable, you can't build on it. You can't reference previous incidents to establish patterns because they'll insist those incidents didn't happen or didn't happen the way you remember. This makes accountability impossible. You can't hold someone responsible for past behavior when they've convinced themselves and possibly others that the past was different. The disorienting effect is that you start to distrust your own memory. If your version of events is consistently challenged, you begin to doubt yourself. Maybe you are misremembering. Maybe it wasn't as bad as you thought. This is exactly what the manipulator wants for you to stop trusting your own mind and instead accept their version of reality. Revisionist history is particularly damaging in long-term relationships where shared history should be a foundation. Instead, that foundation is constantly shifting, rewritten to serve the manipulator's current needs. You can't build anything stable on sand that's constantly being rearranged. Preemptive accusations. Before you can bring up something they did, they accuse you of it. You were about to confront them about lying, but they beat you to it, claiming you're the dishonest one. You were going to address their jealous behavior, but they've already accused you of being possessive. This is preemptive accusation, and it's manipulation through misdirection. By accusing you first, they put you on the defensive. Now, instead of addressing their behavior, you're defending yourself against false charges. The original issue gets buried under your need to clear your name. They've successfully derailed the confrontation you were planning. The tactic works even better when their accusation contains a grain of truth. Maybe you did make one small error that they're now exaggerating and using to distract from their larger transgression. You get caught up explaining context, minimizing legitimate criticism of your behavior, while their worse offense goes unaddressed. Preemptive accusations also serve as projection. The manipulator is often guilty of exactly what they're accusing you of. By launching the accusation first, they create the appearance of being the victim rather than the perpetrator. To outside observers, it might even look like you're the one engaging in projection, copying their accusation back at them. The psychological effect on the victim is exhausting. You're constantly defending yourself, never getting to address the real issues. Over time, you become so focused on clearing your name that you forget you were originally the one with a legitimate grievance. The manipulator has successfully made their problem into your problem. Whataboutism. You're trying to discuss a specific issue, but every time you bring it up, they deflect by bringing up something else. What about that time you did this? What about this other unrelated problem? They're not engaging with what you're saying. They're creating a maze of diversions that leads away from the original topic. This is whataboutism, a rhetorical technique that avoids accountability by pointing to other issues. The manipulator refuses to address the current problem by insisting we should talk about something else instead. If you follow them down these rabbit holes, you'll never resolve anything. Each deflection leads to another, creating an infinite loop of unresolved issues. The tactic is particularly effective because some of the whatabouts might be legitimate concerns. You did make that mistake they're bringing up. But by raising it now, in the middle of discussing their behavior, they're weaponizing it as a deflection rather than addressing it as its own issue. Both things might need to be discussed, but derailing one conversation to avoid accountability is manipulation. In larger contexts, whataboutism is used politically to deflect criticism. When confronted with wrongdoing, point to someone else's wrongdoing. It doesn't actually address the criticism. It just muddies the waters and shifts focus. In personal relationships, it ensures nothing ever gets resolved. Every issue you raise becomes an opportunity for them to raise counter issues. You spend all your energy defending yourself against their deflections and never get the acknowledgement or changed behavior you need. The original problem persists because you never actually got to discuss it. Calculated generosity. They're incredibly generous, but there's something off about it. The gifts are grand, public, performative, but in private, when you need real support, they're absent. Or the generosity comes at strange times, right after they've done something harmful, as if the gift is meant to erase the transgression. This is calculated generosity, where kindness becomes a tool of manipulation rather than genuine care. The manipulator uses generosity strategically. Large public gestures make them look good to others and create a narrative that they're wonderful, making your complaint seem ungrateful. Gifts after conflict serve as replacement for apology or changed behavior. You're supposed to forget the harm because look at this expensive present. Generosity that creates obligation makes you feel indebted, less likely to leave or establish boundaries. The gifts might also be used to isolate you. Such expensive things create a lifestyle you can't maintain on your own, making you financially dependent. Or they're so lavish that you feel guilty for even thinking about leaving someone so generous. But real generosity doesn't come with strings. It doesn't require gratitude performances. It doesn't serve as substitute for genuine emotional connection or behavioral change. If someone's generosity feels like it's being held over your head, if you're being reminded of it constantly, if it seems designed to obligate rather than simply give, then it's not generosity. It's investment in control, walking on eggshells. You never know which version of them you're going to get. Sometimes they're fine, but other times, small things set them off into explosions of anger or days of cold withdrawal. You can't predict what will trigger them, so you start monitoring every word, every action, trying desperately to avoid the landmines. You're walking on eggshells, and it's exhausting. This state of hypervigilance is exactly what the manipulator wants. When you're constantly on edge, you're easier to control. You self-censor. You suppress your needs. You twist yourself into whatever shape seems safest in the moment. Your entire existence becomes about managing their moods. The unpredictability is key. If they were consistently volatile, you could adjust or leave. But because sometimes they're wonderful, you keep hoping this time will be different. Maybe if you just figure out the right way to act, you can keep them in their good mood. But the truth is, their reactions aren't actually about your behavior. They're about control. The manipulator creates an environment of fear and uncertainty, then watches as you exhaust yourself trying to prevent explosions that were never really in your control. You're not responsible for managing another adult's emotions. But the manipulator has convinced you that you are, that their anger or withdrawal is a response to your failure to behave correctly. This belief keeps you trapped, constantly working to please someone whose moods were never really about you at all. Cognitive dissonance exploitation. They create situations where your beliefs about them conflict with their actual behavior. You believe they love you, but they consistently treat you poorly. You think they're honest, but you keep catching them in lies. This cognitive dissonance, the discomfort of holding contradictory beliefs, is painful. The human brain tries to resolve it, and the manipulator knows this. They exploit your need for consistency by giving you just enough good behavior to cling to your positive beliefs about them while continuing the harmful patterns. You'll twist yourself into logical knots trying to reconcile the contradiction. They really do love me. They're just going through a hard time. They didn't mean to hurt me. They're stressed. These rationalizations help resolve the dissonance by explaining away the conflicting information. But you're doing the manipulator's work for them. You're the one maintaining the illusion that they're a good person, despite mounting evidence to the contrary. The manipulator benefits from your need for cognitive consistency. Instead of believing your lying eyes and updating your beliefs about them, you distort your perception of their behavior to match your beliefs. This is how people stay in obviously harmful situations for years. Their belief that the person must care about them conflicts so sharply with the person's behavior that they simply stop processing the behavior accurately. Cognitive dissonance is uncomfortable, but it's trying to tell you something. When your beliefs about someone consistently conflict with how they actually treat you, trust the behavior. They're showing you who they are. Believe them. The persecution complex. According to them, everyone is always out to get them. They're constantly the victim of other people's malice, incompetence, or misunderstanding. They never consider that maybe they played a role in these conflicts. It's always someone else's fault. Always some external force persecuting them. This is the persecution complex, and its manipulation through permanent victim status. When someone presents themselves as perpetually persecuted, it serves multiple functions. First, it absolves them of responsibility. They can't be at fault if they're always the victim. Second, it elicits your sympathy and support. You rally around them against their supposed persecutors. Third, it isolates you. If they're in conflict with everyone else, you become their only ally, cut off from other perspectives that might reveal the truth. The pattern emerges over time. Every job ends because of a terrible boss or backstabbing coworkers. Every friendship falls apart because the other person betrayed them. Every family member has wronged them. They're a blameless victim in a world full of villains. But the common denominator in all these situations is them. The real manipulation becomes clear when they eventually turn on you. The moment you establish a boundary or challenge them, you become the latest persecutor. The sob story they're now telling about you is identical to the ones they told about everyone else. You were never special. You were just the current person they hadn't yet cast as villain in their narrative. Deliberate misunderstanding. You explain something clearly. They claim they don't understand. You explain again, differently. Still, they're confused. But you know they're not actually confused. They understand perfectly well. They're pretending not to as a form of resistance or deflection. This is deliberate misunderstanding, and it's a passive-aggressive way to avoid complying with requests or engaging with issues they don't want to address. By feigning confusion, they force you to repeat yourself endlessly. You become frustrated, maybe even angry. Now, the issue isn't what you were originally discussing. It's your frustration with their supposed inability to understand. They've made your emotional reaction the problem, successfully avoiding the original topic. The tactic also makes you doubt your own communication skills. If they can't understand you, maybe you're not explaining it well enough. Maybe you're the problem. You twist yourself into increasingly convoluted explanations, trying to make them understand something they already understood perfectly well from the first explanation. Deliberate misunderstanding is particularly insidious because proving it's deliberate is nearly impossible. They can always claim they genuinely don't get it. How do you prove someone understands something they claim they don't? The pattern reveals itself over time. They understand complex concepts in other contexts, but suddenly become dense when it's convenient. They comprehend similar situations when they're not being asked to change or take responsibility. The selective nature of their confusion gives them away. Forced teaming. You've just met them, but they're already using language that implies you're a unit. We should stick together. You and I both know, people like us. This is forced teaming, a manipulation tactic that creates artificial intimacy and obligation. By speaking as if you're already on the same team, the manipulator bypasses the natural process of building trust and connection. They're manufacturing closeness that doesn't actually exist yet. This technique is used by predators, salespeople, and anyone trying to manipulate quickly. It works because humans are social creatures who respond positively to being included. When someone speaks to us as if we're already united, we unconsciously start to act that way. We don't want to break the illusion of connection by disagreeing or establishing boundaries. The manipulator is counting on this. They're creating a pseudo-relationship where you feel obligated to go along with their suggestions because we're on the same team. Refusing or disagreeing feels like betrayal of a partnership that was actually forced upon you without consent. Red flags include immediate intimacy, speaking for you as if they know what you want, implying shared knowledge or beliefs without checking, using us and we before any real relationship exists. Healthy relationships develop gradually with consent. When someone is pushing fast intimacy and artificially creating team dynamics, they're trying to override your natural caution. That caution exists for a reason. Trust it. Arbitrary rules. The rules keep changing. What was acceptable yesterday is forbidden today. What they demanded last week, they now criticize. There's no consistency, no way to predict what will be okay and what will trigger their anger or disapproval. This is the manipulation of arbitrary rules designed to keep you confused and compliant. When you can't figure out the rules, you can't win. That's the point. The manipulator isn't trying to help you succeed. They're trying to maintain control through unpredictability. If the rules were consistent, you could learn them and navigate successfully. But constantly changing, arbitrary rules ensure you're always wrong, always apologizing, always trying harder to figure out what they want. This appears in workplace harassment, where an employee can never satisfy their boss because the standards are deliberately unstable. It appears in abusive households where children are punished for things that were fine yesterday, creating an atmosphere of fear and confusion. It appears in relationships where your partner's expectations shift constantly, leaving you anxiously trying to hit a moving target. The exhaustion of trying to comply with arbitrary rules is profound. You're hypervigilant, constantly scanning for clues about what's acceptable right now, knowing it could change at any moment. This state of perpetual uncertainty is exactly what the manipulator wants. It keeps you focused entirely on them, on reading their moods, on preventing their disapproval. Your entire existence centers on trying to navigate their arbitrary system. That's complete control. And you might not even realize you've been trapped in it until you're too exhausted to escape. Playing dumb when caught. You catch them in a lie or doing something wrong. Their first response is to play dumb. What are you talking about? I don't know what you mean. I don't remember that. They're forcing you to explain, to prove, to convince them of what they already know is true. This serves multiple purposes. It buys time to construct a better defense. It exhausts you by making you work to establish facts that should be obvious. It allows them to gauge how much evidence you have so they know what they can deny. It positions them as confused victim rather than guilty party. Most people, when caught doing something wrong, will either admit it or make excuses. The person who plays dumb is deploying a calculated strategy. They're testing whether you'll persist in confronting them or give up out of frustration. They're making confrontations so exhausting that you'll think twice before doing it again. The really skilled manipulator will maintain the confused act even as you present evidence. They'll question the evidence, misinterpret it, claim it doesn't mean what it clearly means. By the end of the conversation, you're the one feeling crazy for insisting that 2 + 2 = 4 while they keep saying they just don't see how you got that answer. The only way to handle this tactic is to refuse to engage with the feigned confusion. State the fact once. If they deny it, you know they're lying. There's no point in explaining further. They understood the first time. They're just pretending they didn't. Normalization of dysfunction. At first, their behavior shocked you. It was so far outside what you considered acceptable that you reacted strongly. But over time, as the behavior continued and even escalated, your reactions diminished. What once seemed outrageous now feels normal. This is normalization of dysfunction, and it's how people end up tolerating things they never thought they would. The process is gradual. Each boundary crossed becomes the new normal. Each escalation is just slightly worse than the last, not so much worse that it triggers the outrage the first incident did. The manipulator is slowly adjusting your baseline for acceptable behavior. What you would have considered deal breakers become just how they are. What would have sent you running now barely registers. You've been desensitized. This technique is particularly powerful in relationships that last years. The person you are at year 5 has habituated to so much dysfunction that the person you were at year 1 wouldn't recognize your life. If you could show past you what you're tolerating now, past you would be horrified. But it didn't happen all at once. It happened degree by degree, your tolerance for mistreatment slowly being expanded until you're accepting things that would have been absolutely unthinkable before. Breaking free requires remembering who you were before, what your standards were, what you wouldn't have tolerated. It requires asking whether you're accepting behavior now just because you've gotten used to it, not because it's actually acceptable. Dysfunction doesn't become okay just because it becomes familiar. The final truth of control. Here's what all these tricks have in common. They're about control disguised as something else. Love, concern, confusion, weakness, whatever the disguise, the goal is always the same: to make you dance to their tune, to keep you off balance, to ensure that your reality, your emotions, your decisions, maybe even your thoughts aren't fully your own. The darkest psychology isn't about force. It's about making you complicit in your own manipulation. It's about getting you to hand over control voluntarily, to doubt yourself so thoroughly that you look to your manipulator as the only source of truth. It's about trapping you so completely that you don't even realize you're trapped. You think you're making choices. You think you're seeing clearly, but someone else built the maze you're walking through. Someone else wrote the script you think you're improvising. These 50 tricks are just the beginning. There are 100 ways to bend a mind, 100 paths to psychological control. Some are subtle enough that even now, knowing about them, you might not recognize them when they're used on you. The best manipulations feel like your own ideas. The deepest control feels like freedom. And by the time you realize what happened, if you ever do, the manipulator has already moved on to their next victim while you're left wondering how you ended up here and whether any of your thoughts were ever really your own. Emotional hostage taking. They don't just threaten to leave, they threaten to harm themselves if you leave. They'll say they can't live without you, that you're the only thing keeping them alive, that your decision to set a boundary or walk away will destroy them. This is emotional hostage taking, and it's one of the cruelest manipulations because it weaponizes your compassion. You're not staying because you want to, you're staying because you're terrified of what they might do if you don't. The manipulator has made you responsible for their well-being, their safety, even their life. That's not a relationship. That's captivity. You're being held prisoner not by locks and chains, but by guilt and fear. And here's the dark truth: people who genuinely want to harm themselves need professional help, not a romantic partner or friend held captive by threats. But most people making these threats aren't actually suicidal. They're using the threat as a control mechanism. They've learned that nothing stops you from leaving quite as effectively as making you believe their blood will be on your hands. The way to recognize this manipulation is to notice the pattern. The threats come out precisely when you try to establish boundaries or leave. They're strategic, timed to maximum effect, and often, once you've been successfully reeled back in, the crisis mysteriously resolves. They're fine, until the next time you try to leave. Altruistic shaming. They frame their manipulation as selflessness. A real friend would do this for me. If you loved me, you wouldn't hesitate. I would do it for you without question. They're not asking for what they want. They're telling you that refusing makes you selfish, unloving, a bad person. This is altruistic shaming, using moral standards as a weapon. The manipulator positions their wants as tests of your character. If you had any decency, any loyalty, any love, you'd comply without question. Your hesitation or refusal becomes evidence of your moral failure. You're not just saying no to a request, you're revealing yourself as fundamentally deficient. The trick is particularly effective on people with strong moral codes or those who are raised to always put others first. These people are vulnerable to having their values weaponized against them. The manipulator knows exactly which buttons to push. They appeal to your sense of duty, loyalty, compassion, all the things that make you a good person, and twist them into tools of control. A healthy request comes with acceptance that you might say no. It respects your autonomy. But altruistic shaming doesn't allow for no. It's structured so that refusing makes you the villain. And if you do refuse, you'll be punished not just with consequences, but with a character assassination. You're selfish, you're heartless, you never really cared. The manipulator will tell this story to others too, recruiting people to their narrative of your moral failure. Controlled spontaneity. They seem spontaneous, fun, unpredictable, but look closer. The spontaneity only goes in directions they want. When you suggest something spontaneous, they have reasons it won't work. But when they spring something on you, you're expected to drop everything and comply. This is controlled spontaneity. The illusion of carefree flexibility that actually only bends one way. The manipulator gets to be the fun one, the exciting one, while you're cast as the boring, rigid one if you ever express needs for planning or predictability. But the truth is, they're only spontaneous when it serves them. Your spontaneity is shut down. Your suggestions are impractical. Your ideas are dismissed. They maintain complete control while appearing to be the opposite of controlling. This tactic also serves to keep you off balance. You can't plan. You can't prepare. You're always reacting to their sudden decisions, their last-minute changes, their impulsive choices. Your life revolves around their whims while they face no reciprocal disruption. If you point out the pattern, they'll accuse you of wanting to control them, of being too rigid, of sucking the joy out of life. But wanting basic predictability and reciprocity isn't controlling. Having your needs matter as much as theirs isn't rigid. The person insisting only their spontaneity counts is the one doing the controlling. Strategic incompletion. They start projects and never finish. They make promises and follow through halfway. They begin conversations and leave them hanging. This pattern of strategic incompletion keeps you in a state of perpetual waiting. You're always anticipating completion that never comes. This serves the manipulator in several ways. Incomplete tasks mean you can't move forward. You're stuck waiting for them. Unfinished conversations mean issues never get resolved. Conflicts remain in limbo. Partial follow-through on promises means they can claim they tried while never actually delivering. The incompletion is strategic because it gives them maximum benefit with minimum effort. They get credit for starting without the accountability of finishing, and you're left holding the bag, unable to plan, unable to move on, unable to get closure. If you push for completion, you're nagging. If you finish things yourself, you've proven they never needed to do it anyway. It's a no-win situation. The manipulator has found a way to benefit from inaction while making your completely reasonable desire for completion seem unreasonable. Over time, you lower your expectations. You stop believing things will get finished. You learn to live in permanent incompletion. And that state of suspended animation is exactly where the manipulator wants you, waiting indefinitely for something they never intended to complete. Empathy mining. Early in the relationship, they ask deep questions. They want to know your fears, your traumas, your vulnerabilities. They're such good listeners. They seem so caring, so interested in understanding you. You open up, feeling safe, feeling seen. You've just been empathy mined. Everything you revealed will be used against you later. The manipulator wasn't building intimacy. They were gathering intelligence. Your fears become their weapons. The trauma you shared becomes ammunition in future arguments. The vulnerabilities you exposed become the exact pressure points they'll push when they want to control you. This is one of the most betraying manipulations because it poisons what should have been genuine connection. You thought you were being intimate. You were actually being interrogated. The information you gave freely, trustingly, becomes the arsenal they use to destroy you. When they deploy this information later, it's devastating not just because of what they're saying, but because of the betrayal it represents. They took your openness and weaponized it. They turned your trust into a trap. And now you'll think twice before being vulnerable with anyone again. The manipulator has damaged not just your relationship with them, but your ability to trust in general. That's collateral damage they don't care about because they already got what they needed. Concern trolling. They express concern for you, but the concern is actually criticism or control disguised as care. I'm just worried about you drinking when you have 2 glasses of wine. I'm concerned you're working too hard when you're pursuing a goal they don't want you to achieve. The framework of concern makes it nearly impossible to reject without seeming defensive or in denial. This is concern trolling, using fake worry as a manipulation tool. The manipulator gets to control your behavior while maintaining the moral high ground. They're not being controlling. They're just concerned. They care so much. If you object, you're accused of not letting people who love you worry about you. You're defensive. You can't accept care. But their concern isn't genuine. It's a vehicle for criticism and control. Real concern asks questions and offers support. It respects your autonomy. Fake concern makes declarations and demands changes. It assumes you're incapable of managing your own life. The manipulator positioning themselves as the concerned party makes them the expert on your life and you the subject of their worry, inferior and in need of their guidance. Over time, concern trolling erodes your confidence in your own judgment. If someone is constantly expressing worry about your choices, you start to wonder if they're right. Maybe you can't be trusted to make good decisions. Maybe you do need their oversight. That's exactly the doubt the manipulator wants to plant. Reality negotiation. Facts aren't fixed when you're dealing with someone who treats reality as negotiable. You saw something happen, but they want to discuss whether it really happened that way. You have evidence, but they want to debate what the evidence means. Everything becomes a negotiation, even objective reality. This is reality negotiation, and it's exhausting. The manipulator treats your perception, your memory, your evidence as just one interpretation among many equally valid possibilities. They're not saying you're lying. They're saying, maybe you misunderstood, misremembered, misinterpreted. It's a softer form of gaslighting, but equally effective. By making reality negotiable, they avoid ever having to admit wrongdoing. There's always another interpretation, another way to look at it, another explanation that absolves them. You can never pin them down because facts themselves become slippery in their hands. The effect on you is profound disorientation. If reality is always up for debate, you have no solid ground to stand on. You start qualifying everything. I think this happened. I believe I saw this. Your certainty dissolves under their constant negotiations. And once you're unsure of your own perceptions, they can tell you anything. They become the arbiter of what's real because you no longer trust your own mind to tell you. Toxic positivity. Everything must be positive. You're not allowed to be sad, angry, or upset. When you express difficult emotions, they shut you down with forced optimism. Just be grateful. Look on the bright side. Others have it worse. This is toxic positivity, and it's emotional invalidation disguised as encouragement. The manipulator doesn't want to deal with your real feelings, so they demand you suppress them. But emotions don't disappear just because they're inconvenient. Forcing positivity doesn't create genuine happiness. It creates shame about natural human experiences. You learn that your negative emotions are unacceptable, that expressing authentic feelings means you're negative, ungrateful, difficult. The manipulator benefits by never having to provide real emotional support. They don't have to sit with your pain or help you process difficulties. They can dismiss your feelings with a platitude and move on, leaving you to handle your emotions alone while also feeling guilty for having them. Toxic positivity also prevents necessary changes. If you're not allowed to complain, you can't identify problems. If you must always be grateful, you can't advocate for better treatment. The mandate for constant positivity keeps you from addressing legitimate issues, which suits the manipulator perfectly. Real support holds space for all emotions. It doesn't demand you perform happiness when you're hurting. If someone can only handle the happy version of you, they don't actually care about you. They care about their comfort. Paper trail sabotage. They make promises verbally but refuse to put anything in writing. They'll claim it's because they don't like being formal, they trust you. Written agreements are for people who don't trust each other. But the real reason is that without a paper trail, they can deny everything later. This is paper trail sabotage, and it's about maintaining deniability. When there's no record, it's your word against theirs. And the manipulator is often more believable, more charismatic, better at performing credibility. They know that in a he said she said situation, they'll likely win. So they deliberately avoid creating evidence. This appears in business dealings where someone promises things they never intend to deliver. It appears in personal relationships where someone makes commitments they plan to break. It appears anywhere a manipulator wants the freedom to rewrite history later. When someone consistently refuses to document agreements, it's a red flag. Honest people aren't afraid of paper trails. They want clarity and mutual understanding. The person avoiding documentation is planning to exploit the ambiguity later. They're setting up a situation where you'll have no proof, no leverage, no way to hold them accountable. Your memory of what was agreed to becomes disputable. Their verbal promises evaporate the moment they become inconvenient. Moving the deadline. You're working towards something with an agreed-upon timeline, but as the deadline approaches, they change it. They need more time. The situation has changed. Circumstances beyond their control. The deadline moves. This happens once, twice, repeatedly. This is moving the deadline, and it's about keeping you in suspended animation. You're working toward a goal that keeps receding. The manipulator benefits from your continued effort without ever having to deliver their end of the bargain. In relationships, this looks like someone who keeps pushing back the timeline for commitment, for moving in together, for any concrete step forward. You're patient because they ask for more time, but more time becomes even more time, indefinitely. At work, it's the boss who keeps delaying that promotion, that raise, that recognition. You keep performing, keep sacrificing, keep waiting for a reward that's always just around the next corner. The move deadline is never presented as the manipulator's fault. There are always external circumstances, reasonable explanations, but the pattern reveals the truth. They're not planning to deliver. They're just planning to keep you waiting, keep you trying, keep you invested in a future that will never arrive. Your sunk cost keeps growing while they benefit from your continued effort without reciprocation, virtue signaling as camouflage. They talk constantly about their values, their ethics, their principles. They perform goodness publicly. But privately, their behavior contradicts everything they claim to stand for. This is virtue signaling as camouflage, using public displays of morality to hide private immorality. The manipulator has learned that if they talk enough about being good, people will assume they are good without checking whether their actions match their words. The performance is designed to deflect scrutiny. Who would suspect someone so vocal about honesty of lying? Who would question the motives of someone constantly proclaiming their empathy? The loud public virtue serves as armor against accusations of private vice. This tactic is particularly effective because calling it out makes you look cynical. When you point out that their actions don't match their words, they can paint you as someone who doesn't believe in the values themselves. You're attacking not just them, but the principles they represent. Other people rush to their defense because they've bought the performance. Over time, the manipulator becomes untouchable, protected by their reputation for goodness, even as they do harm behind closed doors. The gap between their public and private selves grows wider, but no one sees it because everyone is watching the performance instead of the reality. Emotional baiting. They do something designed to provoke an emotional reaction from you. Then when you react, your reaction becomes the problem. They bait you into anger, tears, or frustration, then point to your emotional response as evidence that you're unstable, overreactive, the real problem. This is emotional baiting, and it's about making you look bad while escaping accountability for the provocation. The manipulator knows exactly which buttons to push. They've studied you. They know what hurts you, what angers you, what will make you lose your composure. And they push those buttons deliberately, then act shocked when you react. But I was just joking. Why are you so sensitive? Your completely natural response to their deliberate provocation becomes evidence of your deficiency. The cruelest part is that they often do this publicly. They bait you in front of others, then watch as you look unhinged while they remain calm. To observers who didn't see the bait, only the reaction, you look like the problem. The manipulator has successfully made you the villain. This tactic is particularly insidious because it punishes you for having emotions. The more you care, the easier you are to bait. The more you react, the more evidence they have that you're the unstable one. You learn to suppress all reactions, giving them even more control. The comparison trap. They're always measuring you against others, but the measurements are rigged. When someone else does something wrong, they get understanding and excuses. When you do the same thing, you get judgment. The standards applied to you are impossibly high, while everyone else gets grace. This is the comparison trap, and it's about making you feel uniquely inadequate. The manipulator creates a double standard where nothing you do is good enough, while others are easily forgiven their flaws. This serves multiple purposes. It keeps you striving for approval that's always just out of reach. It isolates you from potential allies because you resent the people who get treated better than you. It makes you believe you're the problem since everyone else seems to satisfy the manipulator easily. But the game is rigged. Those other people probably don't actually have it easier. The manipulator is likely using you to make them feel inadequate too, or those other people aren't seeing the manipulator's true nature yet. You're just further along in the cycle. The comparison trap works by making you believe the problem is you, rather than the manipulator's unfair standards. If only you were more like that person, you'd be treated better. But the truth is, no matter how much you change, the goalpost will move. Because it was never about you being good enough. It was about keeping you in a state of perpetual inadequacy. Information overload. When you ask a simple question or raise a concern, they respond with an avalanche of information. Details, tangents, explanations that spiral into complexity. By the time they finish talking, you're confused, overwhelmed, and can no longer remember your original point. This is information overload as a defensive tactic. The manipulator buries you in data to avoid answering clearly. The avalanche serves multiple purposes. It makes simple things seem complicated, suggesting that you just don't understand the complexity they're dealing with. It exhausts you so that pursuing the question further feels like too much work. It allows them to hide non-answers in a pile of words, and it makes them seem knowledgeable and you seem simple for not following their elaborate reasoning. But complexity is often a red flag. Simple questions should have straightforward answers. When someone responds to "What time will you be home?" with a 15-minute dissertation on traffic patterns, work obligations, and philosophical reflections on the nature of time, they're avoiding a simple answer. The information overload is designed to confuse and deflect. You walk away from these conversations feeling stupid, like you just couldn't understand their explanation. But the truth is, there was nothing to understand. They just threw words at you until you gave up trying to get a real answer. Monopolizing victimhood. In any situation, no matter who was actually harmed, they find a way to position themselves as the victim. You're sick, but somehow they're suffering more from having to care for you. You lost your job, but they're the one who's really upset about it. You were hurt, but they're devastated by your reaction to being hurt. This is monopolizing victimhood, and it means you never get to be the one who's struggling, who needs support, who deserves sympathy. The manipulator has claimed permanent victim status. No matter what happens, they center themselves as the one who's really suffering. This serves them by ensuring all emotional resources flow toward them. You can't ask for support because they need it more. You can't express pain because theirs is greater. You end up comforting them for the thing they did to you, a complete reversal of appropriate dynamics. Over time, you stop bringing up your own struggles. What's the point? It will just become about them anyway. You learn to handle everything alone while they receive endless support for problems that are often manufactured or exaggerated. The monopolization is complete. They've claimed all the sympathy, all the care, all the emotional energy. You're left depleted, unsupported, expected to give endlessly while receiving nothing, and if you complain, you're being selfish. Can't you see how much they're suffering? Conditional vulnerability. They're vulnerable, but only strategically. They share deep things, but always at moments that serve a purpose. Maybe they reveal trauma right when you're about to set a boundary, making you feel too guilty to proceed. Maybe they open up about insecurities right when you're upset with them, shifting the focus to comforting them. This is conditional vulnerability, using openness as a manipulation tool. Real vulnerability is about genuine connection and trust. Conditional vulnerability is about control. The manipulator has learned that showing weakness can be powerful. It makes people feel trusted, special, needed, so they weaponize their vulnerability, deploying it strategically to achieve specific outcomes. The timing reveals the manipulation. Their emotional revelations always seem to come at moments when you're about to do something they don't want, when attention is drifting away from them, when you're angry and they need to derail your feelings. The vulnerability becomes a tool to manipulate rather than a bridge to intimacy. You start to feel guilty for noticing this pattern. How can you question someone's vulnerability? What kind of person suspects manipulation when someone is being open? But timing matters. Repeated patterns matter. And vulnerability that consistently serves to deflect, control, or manipulate isn't genuine vulnerability. It's strategic disclosure designed to get a specific reaction from you. Creating witnesses. They make sure other people see their good behavior toward you while hiding their bad behavior. In public, they're attentive, affectionate, respectful. But in private, they're cruel, dismissive, abusive. This is creating witnesses, building a body of evidence that contradicts your experience. The manipulator knows that if you ever try to expose them, they have dozens of witnesses who will say, "But they're so good to you. I've seen how much they care." The public performance serves as insurance against your eventual accusations. Those witnesses become flying monkeys without knowing it. They'll defend the manipulator, question your perceptions, suggest you're being unfair. After all, they've seen with their own eyes how well you're treated. What they haven't seen is the private reality, and they don't believe it exists because it contradicts their direct experience. This tactic is particularly common in domestic abuse situations where the abuser is charming and likable publicly while being terrifying privately. Victims struggle to be believed because the abuser has carefully cultivated an image that contradicts the victim's claims. The creation of witnesses is deliberate. The manipulator invests in their public image specifically to make your truth harder to tell and harder to believe when you do tell it. They've built a fortress of good reputation to hide behind. Time theft. They waste your time, but it's always disguised as something else. They keep you waiting without apology. They start conversations right when you need to leave. They create crises that require your immediate attention. Your time is constantly being consumed by their needs, their drama, their chaos, while your own priorities go unattended. This is time theft, and it's a form of control. When someone controls your time, they control your life. You can't pursue your own goals when you're always dealing with their emergencies. You can't maintain other relationships when you're always on call for them. You can't take care of yourself when they've monopolized your schedule. The manipulator benefits from keeping you busy with them. Time spent on them is time not spent on things that might help you see the relationship clearly, build independence, or form connections with people who might help you escape. Time theft is often invisible because each instance seems justified. They needed help. There was a crisis. They were waiting for important information from you. But the pattern reveals itself over time. Your time is never your own. Their needs always take precedence. And if you try to establish boundaries around your time, you're selfish, unavailable, not really committed to the relationship. Misery poker. You express a problem. Instead of empathy, you get competition. They've had it worse. Their situation is more difficult. Your problem is ranked against theirs, and theirs always wins. This is misery poker, turning suffering into a competition where they always hold the winning hand. The effect is that you stop sharing problems. Why bother? It will just trigger a recitation of how much worse they have it. You learn that your suffering doesn't count unless it surpasses theirs. And since they're always ready to up the ante, you can never win. You don't matter enough to complain. Misery poker serves the manipulator by centering all attention on them, even when you reach out for support. It also trains you to minimize your own struggles. If they always have it worse, maybe your problems aren't real problems. Maybe you're weak for struggling with things they would handle easily. Your distress becomes evidence of your inadequacy rather than a normal human experience deserving of care. The truly insidious aspect is that misery poker often comes from people who claim to be empathetic. They talk about understanding pain, about being there for others. But when you actually need them, you get competition instead of comfort. Their empathy is performative, available only when it costs them nothing. Selective listening. They hear what they want to hear and ignore the rest. You explain something clearly, but later they claim you never said it or said something completely different. This isn't forgetting. It's selective listening, deliberately filtering information to create a version of reality that suits them. When you say something they don't want to acknowledge, it simply doesn't penetrate. But when you say something they can use against you later, their recall is perfect. They remember every slight, every mistake, every offhand comment that can be weaponized. But your needs, your boundaries, your clearly stated preferences might as well have never been spoken. The manipulator uses selective listening to avoid accountability while building a case against you. They didn't hear you say no, so they proceeded as if you'd agreed. They didn't catch your clearly stated boundary, so they crossed it. But they remember with perfect clarity that thing you said in anger 3 years ago. This creates a maddening dynamic where you're constantly trying to make yourself heard while watching them effortlessly recall anything that serves their narrative. You start to doubt whether you actually said things clearly. Maybe you weren't specific enough. Maybe you need to repeat yourself. But the problem isn't your communication. It's their selective reception designed to benefit them while disadvantaging you. Proxy punishment. They're angry with you, but they don't confront you directly. Instead, they take it out on something or someone you care about. They're suddenly cold to your friends. They neglect responsibilities that affect you. They harm something you value. This is proxy punishment, inflicting pain indirectly because they know it will hurt you while maintaining deniability. If you confront them about proxy punishment, they can claim innocence. They weren't punishing you. They just didn't feel like seeing your friend today. They simply forgot that important task. It's all coincidence that their actions consistently harm things you care about right after conflicts. But the pattern is clear. The manipulator is sending a message. If you displease them, the things you love will suffer. This creates a climate of fear. You become afraid to upset them, not just because of what they'll do to you, but because of what they'll do to others. Parents use this tactic with children, harming siblings or pets to control the behavior of the targeted child. Partners use it, being cruel to their partner's friends or family as punishment for perceived slights. The cruelty of proxy punishment lies in making you responsible for others' suffering. They're hurt because of you, because you angered the manipulator, because you weren't compliant enough. The guilt and fear this creates is often more effective than direct punishment would be. Faux apologies. They say sorry, but the apology is hollow. I'm sorry you feel that way. I'm sorry if I hurt you. I'm sorry, but you did this thing first. These aren't real apologies. They're faux apologies, designed to look like accountability while admitting nothing and changing nothing. A real apology acknowledges specific wrongdoing, takes responsibility without qualification, expresses genuine remorse, and commits to changed behavior. Faux apologies do none of these. They're performative words meant to end the conversation without requiring anything from the apologizer. The manipulator has learned that saying sorry is often enough to diffuse anger even if the apology is meaningless. Most people want reconciliation enough that they'll accept a bad apology rather than prolonging conflict. The manipulator exploits this, offering faux apologies that let them keep doing exactly what they were doing while appearing reasonable. Over time, you might not even notice that their apologies are empty. You've been trained to accept sorry as sufficient even when nothing changes. You're grateful for the apology, relieved that they acknowledge the problem, even though they never actually admitted fault, and certainly won't modify their behavior. The pattern continues with regular installments of faux apologies punctuating the ongoing harm. They say the words you need to hear while refusing to do the things you need them to do. Reputational sabotage. They damage your reputation behind your back. They share private information, tell stories that paint you negatively, plant seeds of doubt about your character, but to your face, they're completely supportive. This is reputational sabotage, poisoning how others see you while maintaining the appearance of loyalty. You don't discover this tactic until damage is done. People start treating you differently and you don't know why. Friends become distant. Colleagues seem suspicious. Your reputation has been attacked, but you don't know who did it or what was said. When you finally trace it back to the manipulator, they deny everything or claim they were misunderstood. They were just concerned about you. They were asking for advice on how to help you. Their intentions were good even if the effect was destructive, but the effect was the intention. The manipulator benefits from damaging your reputation in multiple ways. It isolates you from potential allies. It makes you seem like the problematic one, deflecting attention from their bad behavior. It positions them as the reasonable one who tried to help difficult you. And it provides insurance if you ever expose them. Your credibility has already been undermined. People will doubt your accusations because they've been primed to see you as unreliable, dramatic, or dishonest. Forced reconciliation. You've established distance from someone toxic, but others keep pushing you to reconcile. They're family. They miss you. Life's too short to hold grudges. You're pressured to forgive, to reconnect, to give another chance regardless of whether the toxic person has changed or even acknowledged their behavior. This is forced reconciliation, using social pressure to override your boundaries. The people pushing reconciliation usually mean well. They're uncomfortable with conflict and they want everyone to get along, but their comfort shouldn't come at the cost of your safety or well-being. The manipulator often orchestrates forced reconciliation, recruiting others to pressure you. They play victim, claiming they don't understand why you cut them off, that they just want to make things right. The flying monkeys they've recruited believe this narrative and work to bring you back into the manipulator's reach. Forced reconciliation is particularly common in families where unity is valued above all else. The person who maintains boundaries is seen as the problem, not the person whose behavior necessitated those boundaries. You're accused of being unforgiving, of holding grudges, of punishing someone who's probably changed. But forgiveness doesn't require reconciliation. You can forgive someone and still maintain distance. And reconciliation without changed behavior and genuine amends isn't healing. It's just restarting the cycle of harm. Ambient gaslighting. It's not one big lie. It's 1,000 small distortions. A detail changed here. A timeline shifted there. Your words slightly misquoted. Each instance is minor enough that challenging it seems petty, but the cumulative effect is that your entire reality becomes unstable. This is ambient gaslighting. Death by 1,000 reality cuts. The manipulator never outright tells you that you're crazy. They just consistently present a version of events that differ slightly from yours. Over time, those small differences add up. You stop being sure of anything. Did that conversation happen on Tuesday or Wednesday? Did you say you'd be home at 6 or 7? The manipulator is so confident in their version that you start doubting your own. Ambient gaslighting is particularly insidious because each instance is deniable. You're being so specific. Why does it matter what day it was? You're nitpicking. You're being difficult. The manipulator makes you feel unreasonable for caring about accuracy. But accuracy matters because reality matters. When your reality is constantly being subtly rewritten, you lose your ability to trust your own mind. And that's exactly what the manipulator wants. A person who doubts their own perceptions is easy to control because they're looking for external validation of what's real. The manipulator becomes that source of validation, the arbiter of truth in a reality they've systematically destabilized. The gratitude trap. They do something for you, something you might not have even wanted. Then they expect endless gratitude. Every future conflict, they bring up what they did. Every time you set a boundary, you're reminded of their past generosity. You're trapped in perpetual debt for something that was supposedly a gift. This is the gratitude trap, where kindness becomes a chain. The manipulator gives to create obligation. The gift wasn't free. It came with the expectation of future compliance, ongoing appreciation, and immunity from criticism. When you don't perform sufficient gratitude, or when you dare to have needs that conflict with theirs, they weaponize their past generosity. After everything I've done for you, this is how you treat me? The trap is effective because gratitude is a genuine virtue. You should appreciate when people are kind. But the gratitude trap turns healthy appreciation into unhealthy servitude. You're not allowed to move past the gift. You must remain forever grateful, forever indebted, forever willing to prioritize their needs because of what they once did. Real generosity doesn't keep score. It doesn't get brought up in every argument. It doesn't come with strings that get pulled years later. If someone is regularly reminding you of what they've done for you, their giving was never about generosity. It was about investment in control. Chaos manufacturing. Things are calm and you're starting to think clearly about the relationship. That's when new drama erupts. There's always a crisis, always chaos, always something demanding immediate attention. This constant turbulence isn't accidental. This is chaos manufacturing, deliberately creating instability to prevent you from gaining perspective. When you're in crisis mode, you don't have the mental space to evaluate whether the relationship is healthy. You're just trying to survive the current storm. And as soon as one storm passes, another appears. The chaos serves multiple purposes for the manipulator. It keeps you stressed and reactive rather than thoughtful. It creates situations where they can play hero or victim depending on which serves them better. It bonds you through shared trauma. And it prevents you from having the calm, clear headspace needed to recognize the relationship's toxicity. The chaos might be external drama or internal conflict. Either way, you're never allowed to settle into peace where you might start questioning things. The manipulator ensures that stability never lasts long enough for you to see clearly. You're kept off balance, perpetually dealing with emergencies that somehow always trace back to the manipulator, either as cause or central figure. A healthy relationship should bring more stability to your life, not less. If being with someone means living in constant chaos, the chaos isn't happening to them. They're happening to you. Gaslighting. They ghost you, cutting off all contact without explanation. You're left confused and hurt, analyzing every interaction, trying to understand what went wrong. Then they reappear, acting like nothing happened. If you bring up the disappearance, they minimize it. I just needed space. You're overreacting. This is gaslighting. Combining ghosting with gaslighting to make you question your right to be hurt by their disappearance. They can leave whenever they want, and you're not allowed to be upset about it. Your abandonment becomes your oversensitivity. Their cruelty becomes your problem. This tactic trains you to accept inconsistent presence. You learn not to expect reliability because calling it out gets you labeled as needy or clingy. You're grateful when they're around and silent when they disappear because you've been taught that your need for consistency is a flaw. The reappearances are often timed for when you're just about to move on. The manipulator has been monitoring from a distance, watching for signs that you're letting go. That's when they return, reeling you back in with just enough attention to hook you before the cycle repeats. You're kept in a perpetual state of uncertainty, never knowing if this time they're gone for good or if they'll be back tomorrow, expecting you to welcome them without question. Martyrdom Manipulation. Everything they do for you is a sacrifice. They constantly remind you how much they give up, how much they endure, how much they suffer for your sake. This is martyrdom manipulation, using self-sacrifice, real or performed, as a tool of control. The manipulator positions themselves as the perpetual martyr, suffering nobly for you. This creates crushing guilt. How can you complain when they sacrifice so much? How can you leave when they've given up everything for you? Your needs become evidence of your selfishness. After all they've sacrificed, you still want more? But look closer at these sacrifices. Were they asked for? Did you need these things? Or did the manipulator decide unilaterally to make grand gestures and now holds them over your head? Often, martyrs create their own suffering specifically to weaponize it. They take on burdens they weren't asked to carry, then resent you for the weight. The performance of martyrdom is often public. Others see the martyr's suffering and sympathize, not realizing it's self-created and strategically deployed. You become the ungrateful recipient of unwanted sacrifices, unable to refuse them because that would be cruel, unable to appreciate them enough because the debt is designed to be unpayable. Real sacrifice in relationships is mutual, voluntary, and doesn't get weaponized. If someone is constantly reminding you of their sacrifices, they're not a martyr. They're a manipulator using guilt as a weapon. Boundary erosion through emergencies. You set a boundary. They claim to respect it. But then there's an emergency that requires boundary violation. Then another emergency, and another. The boundary gets crossed so frequently for urgent reasons that it effectively doesn't exist. This is boundary erosion through emergencies, using crisis to override your limits. The pattern reveals that the emergencies aren't as urgent as presented, or they're manufactured, or the manipulator is creating situations that require boundary violations. Real emergencies are rare. If your boundaries are being crossed constantly for emergencies, something is wrong. The manipulator benefits by appearing to respect your boundaries theoretically while ignoring them practically. They can claim they're not violating your wishes. Circumstances just keep requiring it. And who could be mad about someone responding to an emergency? But you don't have real boundaries if they only exist during convenient times. Boundaries that collapse under pressure aren't boundaries, they're suggestions. And the manipulator knows this. They've learned that creating sufficient urgency can override any limit you try to set. Over time, you stop bothering to set boundaries. What's the point? Something will just come up that requires their violation. The manipulator has trained you to accept that your needs don't matter when they conflict with their wants, regardless of how they frame those wants as needs. Performative helplessness. They're capable of handling complex tasks in every area of life, except the ones they don't want to handle. Suddenly, they're helpless, confused, unable to figure out what to do. This performative helplessness forces you to step in and take over. They've successfully avoided responsibility while maintaining the excuse that they simply can't do it. The manipulation is revealed when you notice the selective nature of their incompetence. They can't figure out how to make dinner appointments, but they navigate complex work projects effortlessly. They're confused by household tasks, but expert in their hobbies. The helplessness always appears in areas where they want to avoid work. If you refuse to rescue them, they might eventually complete the task, but do it so badly that you take over permanently to avoid the consequences of their incompetence. Or they'll continue claiming inability until you give in out of frustration. Either way, they've shifted the burden to you. Performative helplessness is particularly insidious because it makes you feel needed while actually exploiting you. You believe you're helping someone who genuinely struggles. But you're actually enabling someone who's discovered that pretending to struggle gets them out of unwanted responsibilities. The cost to you is enormous, taking on work that should be shared while they benefit from your assistance without reciprocation. Comparative suffering. You express pain. Instead of empathy, you get comparison. People are starving. Others have cancer. Your problems are measured against the world's worst suffering and found wanting. This is comparative suffering, using others' pain to minimize yours. The effect is that you learn your suffering only counts if it's catastrophic. Normal human struggles don't qualify for attention or care. You start ranking your pain, deciding it's not bad enough to mention. You suffer in silence because somewhere someone has it worse, and the manipulator has taught you that your pain is invalid by comparison. But suffering isn't a competition. Your pain doesn't diminish someone else's, and someone else's pain doesn't erase yours. Comparative suffering is how manipulators avoid providing emotional support while appearing to have perspective. They're not being unsympathetic. They're just being realistic. They're helping you see the bigger picture. But empathy doesn't require ranking suffering. It requires acknowledging the pain in front of you. The manipulator who deflects with comparative suffering is revealing that they don't want to deal with your emotions. Using others' greater suffering as a shield against your legitimate needs doesn't make them wise or grounded. It makes them emotionally unavailable and manipulative. Presumptive Close. They act as if decisions have been made when they haven't. They speak as if agreements exist when you never agreed. So we'll do it this way, as if it were already settled. The presumptive close steamrolls over your autonomy, assuming your compliance and making disagreement feel like breaking an agreement rather than making your actual preference known. This sales tactic becomes relationship manipulation when used to override your decision-making. The manipulator presents their desires as foregone conclusions. By acting as if something is already decided, they make opposing it feel awkward, difficult, like you're being unreasonable by backing out of something everyone already agreed to. Except you never agreed. They just acted like you did until it became true. The presumptive close works because people feel social pressure to go along rather than cause conflict. It's easier to let the assumption stand than to correct it. The manipulator knows this and exploits it, framing their preferences as already decided matters to bypass your actual input. Over time, you have less and less say in your own life because the manipulator keeps presuming your agreement to things you never actually agreed to. Decisions get made without your real participation. Your boundaries get set by their assumptions rather than your actual limits. You wake up one day living a life someone else designed, wondering how you got here. The presumptive close is how you got here, one bypass decision at a time. Retroactive justification. They do something harmful. When confronted, they create justifications after the fact. They construct elaborate explanations for why their behavior was actually reasonable, necessary, even beneficial to you. This is retroactive justification, rewriting harmful actions as justified after they've already happened. The manipulator wasn't thinking about these justifications when they acted. They acted from impulse, anger, or selfishness. But they're smart enough to craft explanations later that make their actions seem defensible. And if they present these justifications confidently enough, you start to doubt your own interpretation. The retroactive justification often includes frameworks that sound reasonable. They were protecting you, teaching you a lesson, preventing a worse outcome. The narrative retroactively paints them as acting from noble motives when they were actually acting from base ones. You end up apologizing to them for being upset about something they did to harm you. The manipulation is complete when you accept their after-the-fact justification as the truth of their initial motivation. You rewrite your own understanding of what happened to match their explanation. They successfully gaslit you into believing harmful actions were actually helpful, all through the magic of crafting a good story after the damage was done. Intermittent reward scheduling. The kindness you crave comes unpredictably, sometimes frequently, sometimes not at all for long stretches. This intermittent reward scheduling is the same mechanism that makes gambling addictive. You never know when the next reward will come, so you keep trying, keep hoping, keep investing. The manipulator has learned that consistent kindness leads to secure attachment, which gives you the confidence to leave if necessary. But intermittent reward creates anxious attachment, where you're so focused on obtaining the next moment of warmth that you'll tolerate incredible amounts of mistreatment to get it. The unpredictability is the key. If they were consistently terrible, you'd leave. If they were consistently kind, you'd feel secure enough to establish boundaries. But the randomness keeps you hooked, always chasing the next high of their approval, their affection, their attention. You tell yourself you're staying because of the good times. But the good times are bait, scattered just frequently enough to keep you from leaving. The manipulator doesn't even have to be kind often. A few moments of warmth among seas of coldness are enough. Because those rare moments become so precious, so desperately sought, that you'll endure almost anything for them. You're not in a relationship. You're at a slot machine that occasionally pays out just enough to keep you playing. Enforced dependency. They systematically undermine your independence. They discourage you from working, from maintaining friendships, from pursuing interests outside the relationship. This enforced dependency ensures you can't easily leave. You've lost your job, your social network, your hobbies, your sense of self outside of them. The cage has been built so gradually you didn't notice. Each step seemed reasonable in isolation. Of course you should spend more time together. Of course they should help you make decisions. Of course it makes sense to simplify your life by letting them handle certain things. But the cumulative effect is that you're no longer capable of functioning independently. You need them for basic things. Your world has shrunk to the size of the relationship. The manipulator benefits enormously from this dependency. You can't leave because you lack the resources, skills, or support system needed to survive alone. They've engineered a situation where you're trapped not by love, but by practical reality. The cruelest aspect is that they often frame this dependency as intimacy. We do everything together. We're so close. We don't need anyone else. The language of romantic connection disguises the reality of systematic isolation and disempowerment. You're not close. You're captured. Strategic forgiveness denial. You've apologized. Sincerely, thoroughly, multiple times. But they won't forgive you. They keep bringing up your mistake, using it as leverage in every argument, holding it over your head indefinitely. This is strategic forgiveness denial, refusing to grant forgiveness because the unforgiven transgression is too useful as a weapon. The manipulator has no intention of forgiving you because your guilt gives them power. As long as you feel bad about what you did, you're willing to tolerate mistreatment. You believe you deserve it. You're making up for your mistake. Your guilt makes you compliant. Why would the manipulator give that up by forgiving you? They might claim they've forgiven you while continuing to reference the mistake constantly. The unforgiven transgression becomes part of the relationship's permanent record, always available to be deployed when they want to win an argument, avoid accountability, or make you feel bad enough to back down from a boundary. The imbalance is stark when compared to how your forgiveness is expected. When they wrong you, you're supposed to forgive quickly and completely. But when you wrong them, forgiveness is perpetually pending, always conditional, never quite granted. You're held to the standard of immediate grace while they maintain grudges indefinitely. It's not about justice. It's about maintaining power through strategic withholding of absolution, projection deflection. They accuse you of their own behaviors. They cheat and accuse you of cheating. They lie and call you dishonest. They manipulate and claim you're trying to control them. This is projection deflection, attacking you for the very things they're guilty of. The tactic serves multiple purposes. It deflects attention from their behavior by putting you on the defensive. It confuses the narrative, making it unclear who's actually doing what. It allows them to address their own guilt feelings by externalizing them onto you. And it often reveals what they're actually doing, making projection a form of confession. When someone is obsessively accusing you of behaviors you're not engaging in, consider whether they might be engaging in those behaviors themselves. The cheater who constantly accuses their faithful partner of infidelity. The liar who claims everyone else is dishonest. The manipulator who insists they're the victim of manipulation. They're telling on themselves, but in a way that makes you the accused. You spend energy defending yourself against false charges while their actual misconduct goes unaddressed. By the time you clear your name, the conversation has moved on and their behavior remains unexamined. They've successfully avoided accountability through attack, making their problems into your problems. Withholding closure. Something ends. A relationship, a friendship, a job. You need closure, explanation, understanding, but they refuse to provide it. They disappear, they stonewall, they give non-answers. This withholding of closure keeps you psychologically attached, endlessly trying to understand what happened. The manipulator knows that unresolved situations haunt us. The human mind craves completion, explanation, resolution. By withholding closure, they ensure you keep thinking about them, keep reaching out, keep trying to make sense of things. You can't move on because you don't have the information needed to process and integrate the experience. This tactic gives the manipulator continued power over you even after they're gone. You're still orbiting them mentally and emotionally, still seeking the answers they refuse to provide. And if they ever choose to offer some breadcrumb of explanation, you're likely to respond, giving them another opportunity to manipulate. The withholding might also include keeping your belongings, maintaining financial entanglements, or leaving shared responsibilities unresolved. These practical ties disguise as logistical issues are actually strategic ways to maintain connection and control. Real closure is something you grant yourself. You stop waiting for them to explain and accept that you'll never fully understand. You make peace with ambiguity. You close the door yourself because they've made it clear they have no intention of providing the closure you seek. Exploitation of caretaking instinct. They're always in crisis, always struggling, always needing rescue. Your caretaking instinct kicks in, you help, support, sacrifice, but nothing you do ever actually improves their situation. New crises replace resolved ones. This is exploitation of caretaking instinct, using your desire to help as a tool to extract endless resources from you. The manipulator has learned that presenting as helpless or victimized activates something deep in caring people. You can't stand by and watch someone suffer when you have the ability to help. They know this. They use it. They manufacture or exaggerate struggles specifically to trigger your caretaking response. But here's the key. People who genuinely want help accept it and improve. People exploiting caretaking instinct resist solutions. They sabotage their own progress. They reject suggestions. They create new problems as fast as old ones resolve. Because the crisis isn't the point. The point is keeping you engaged in trying to fix them. Your endless investment in their well-being drains you while benefiting them. They get attention, resources, emotional labor. You get exhaustion and the growing realization that nothing you do makes any difference. But by then you're emotionally invested. You've put in so much. How can you give up now? The manipulator is counting on sunk cost fallacy to keep you trapped in the perpetual rescuer role while they play permanent victim. Artificial intimacy acceleration. You've just met, but they're already talking about the future together, sharing deep secrets, using relationship language. This artificial intimacy acceleration creates false closeness before trust is earned. It's love-bombing's subtle cousin, moving too fast emotionally rather than just behaviorally. The manipulator knows that people bond through shared vulnerability and future planning. By artificially creating these conditions early, they shortcut the normal process of gradually building trust. You feel like you've known them forever, like this is special, like fate. But that feeling was manufactured, not organic. The rapid intimacy serves several purposes. It creates obligation. How can you reject someone who's been so open with you? It isolates you from people who might warn you that moving this fast is unhealthy. It bypasses your normal vetting process that would notice red flags, and it bonds you before you have enough information to make good decisions about whether this person is safe. When intimacy happens naturally, it's gradual, with both people moving at a comfortable pace. When it's artificial, one person is pushing intensity while claiming it just feels right. Trust your discomfort with pace. Healthy intimacy takes time. Anyone rushing it is either unaware of healthy relationship development or deliberately exploiting the bonding that happens through premature emotional exposure. Poisoning the well. Before you meet their friends or family, before you enter their workplace, before any new social situation, they tell people negative things about you. They poison the well, ensuring that people already have biased perceptions before you arrive. Now you're fighting an uphill battle, trying to disprove narratives you don't even know exist. The manipulator tells colleagues you're controlling before you ever question their work schedule. They tell family you're difficult before you set your first boundary. They tell friends you're jealous before you meet the people they're suspiciously close to. These pre-framed narratives make your normal behaviors look like confirmation of their warnings. When you do set that boundary, colleagues think, see, so controlling. When you establish healthy limits with family, they think, see, so difficult. The manipulator has rigged the game. You can't win because the perception of you was established before you walked in the room. Poisoning the well serves as insurance. If you ever try to expose the manipulator's bad behavior, people don't believe you. They've already been told you're the problem. Your accusations look like the difficult behavior they were warned about. The manipulator maintains their reputation while destroying yours, all through strategic bad-mouthing disguised as concern or explanation. You're fighting a battle you don't know you're in, with weapons you don't have, against an enemy who's already convinced everyone you're the villain. Moral licensing. They do something good and use it as license to do something bad. They were nice to you yesterday, so they're allowed to be cruel today. They helped someone once, so they're exempt from criticism. This is moral licensing, where good behavior is traded for permission to engage in bad behavior. The manipulator operates on a credit system in their mind. Good deeds earn credits that can be spent on bad behavior. They were generous last month, so they're entitled to be selfish now. They were patient earlier, so you should tolerate their impatience. The problem is that this credit system exists only in their mind, and they're the one tallying the scores. You don't get to trade your good behavior for bad. You're expected to be consistently good. But they've granted themselves permission to oscillate based on a moral accounting system you never agreed to. This creates an imbalanced relationship where you're held to consistent standards while they operate on a system where past good behavior excuses present bad behavior. They point to the good version of themselves as evidence that this relationship is worthwhile, while the bad version does damage that the good version supposedly earned the right to do. Real character isn't about trading good deeds for bad deed passes. It's about consistent behavior driven by genuine values. If someone is using past good behavior to justify present bad behavior, they're not actually good. They're strategically manipulating your perception of them. The double bind. They create no-win situations. You're damned if you do and damned if you don't. If you speak up, you're too sensitive. If you stay quiet, you're passive-aggressive. If you set boundaries, you're controlling. If you don't set boundaries, they complain you're too permissive. This is the double bind, where all choices lead to criticism. The manipulator has rigged the game so you cannot win. Whatever you choose, they've positioned themselves to make you wrong. The double bind serves to keep you perpetually off balance and self-doubting. You can't figure out the right way to act because there isn't one. The point isn't to guide you toward better behavior. The point is to ensure you're always wrong. This gives the manipulator endless ammunition for criticism and puts you in a constant state of anxiety trying to navigate an impossible maze. The only way to escape a double bind is to refuse to play. Stop trying to find the right answer to a rigged question. Recognize that you're being set up to fail regardless of choice. The problem isn't your decision. The problem is that the manipulator has created a situation where you lose no matter what. Call it out or walk away. Those are your real options because trying to win an unwinnable game only deepens your entrapment. Weaponized therapy speak. They use psychological terminology to manipulate. You're gaslighting me when you disagree with them. You're trauma dumping when you share feelings. You're love bombing when you're kind. Therapy language becomes a weapon to pathologize your normal behavior while excusing their manipulation. This weaponization of therapeutic concepts is particularly insidious because it uses the language of healing and mental health to cause harm. The manipulator sounds educated, aware, psychologically sophisticated, but they're wielding therapy concepts like bludgeons to beat you down. When you set a boundary, they claim you're being rigid and that's unhealthy. When you express hurt, they say you're playing the victim and that's a manipulation tactic. They've learned the vocabulary of emotional health and use it to frame everything you do as psychologically defective while portraying their manipulation as healthy behavior. Real therapeutic concepts are meant to increase understanding and create healthier dynamics. Weaponized therapy speak does the opposite. It confuses, invalidates, and creates power imbalances where the person with more psychological vocabulary gets to diagnose everyone else's behavior as problematic. If someone is constantly psychoanalyzing you, labeling your normal responses with clinical language, using therapy concepts to shut down your feelings, they're not practicing healthy communication. They're using educated language to manipulate more effectively. Don't let sophisticated vocabulary obscure manipulation. Actions matter more than terminology. Historical revisionism as bonding. They tell stories about their past, about your shared history, that cast both of you as victims of others. This bonding through shared victimhood creates intimacy while also distorting reality. Their exes were all crazy. Their former friends all betrayed them. Every past relationship or situation ended with them being wronged. And slowly, they rewrite your shared history too. Remember when that person was so terrible to us? Remember when we against the world? But as you remember it, that person wasn't terrible and the situation wasn't as dire as they're now portraying. This is historical revisionism as bonding, creating false shared narratives that increase feelings of connection while distorting the past. The manipulator is doing two things. First, they're warning you. See how I was victimized before? Don't do that to me. The implied threat is that if you behave like their exes, you'll be cast as a villain in the next person's hearing of their story. Second, they're creating an us against them dynamic that bonds you through shared enemies, even if those enemies are retrospectively created through rewritten history. Be cautious of anyone whose entire past is filled with villains who wronged them. Either they have terrible judgment in choosing people, or they're rewriting history to cast themselves as perpetual victims. And if they'll rewrite the past with others, they'll rewrite it with you too. Extinction burst escalation. You finally set firm boundaries or try to leave. Instead of respecting this, their behavior escalates dramatically. This is an extinction burst, a psychological phenomenon where unwanted behavior intensifies right before it stops. But manipulators exploit this deliberately, hoping the escalation will scare you back into compliance. The manipulator might become rageful when they've always been cold. They might suddenly become loving when they've been distant. They might make threats, make promises, make grand gestures. The behavior is extreme because they're desperate to regain control. This is their last-ditch effort to keep you trapped. Understanding extinction bursts is critical because they feel like evidence that you should go back. If they're reacting this strongly, maybe you really are being unreasonable. Maybe they really do care since they're trying so hard now. But extinction bursts aren't evidence of change, they're evidence of desperation. The manipulator is escalating because their usual tactics stopped working. Once they regain control, behavior will return to previous patterns or worsen. Knowing this can save you. When someone escalates dramatically right when you establish boundaries or try to leave, don't interpret it as proof of caring or reason to stay. Interpret it as proof that your boundary is necessary and their control is threatened. Hold firm. The extinction burst will pass. And if you give in, you've just taught them that escalation works. Strategic vulnerability timing. They open up right when you're about to do something they don't want. About to set a boundary? They share something heartbreaking that requires your support. About to leave? They reveal trauma that makes you feel too guilty to go. This strategic vulnerability timing uses emotional disclosure as manipulation. Real vulnerability happens when someone feels safe and trusts you enough to open up. Strategic vulnerability happens when someone needs to redirect your attention, elicit your sympathy, or make you feel too guilty to proceed with something they oppose. The timing reveals the manipulation. Their vulnerable moments always seem to coincide with moments you're asserting yourself. That's not vulnerability. That's a tactical deployment of emotion. The manipulator has learned that people can't reject someone who's just been vulnerable with them. It feels cruel. So they wait until the moment you're about to prioritize yourself, then they give you something heavy to carry. Now, instead of following through on your boundary, you're comforting them. Your needs had been successfully derailed. True vulnerability doesn't conveniently appear only when someone needs to stop you from doing something. If you notice that their emotional breakdowns or deep revelations consistently coincide with moments you're trying to establish boundaries or leave, that's not coincidence. That's manipulation. The compliment sandwich trap. They criticize you, but sandwich the criticism between compliments. You're so smart, but you can be really inconsiderate sometimes, though I know your heart's in the right place. This compliment sandwich makes the criticism easier to swallow while ensuring it lands. You can't reject it without seeming like you can't take feedback. The trap is that the compliments aren't genuine appreciation. They're delivery mechanisms for criticism. The manipulator wants to tell you what's wrong with you, but knows direct criticism might trigger resistance. So they coat it in sweetness, making the bitter pill go down easier. Over time, you become conditioned. Every compliment contains a but. Every moment of praise is followed by correction. You never get to just receive appreciation. It always comes with a reminder of how you fall short. The compliments lose meaning because they're just vehicles for criticism, and the criticism accumulates, death by 1,000 paper cuts of negativity disguised as caring feedback. Real compliments stand alone. They don't need to be followed by corrections. If someone consistently uses the compliment sandwich technique, they're not trying to build you up while giving helpful feedback. They're trying to tear you down while maintaining plausible deniability about being critical. The ultimate truth of dark psychology. Here's what you need to understand about all 100 of these tricks. They work not because victims are weak or stupid, but because they exploit fundamental human needs, the need for connection, for understanding, for love, for meaning. The darkest psychology takes what makes us human and weaponizes it against us. These manipulators study you. They learn what you care about, what you fear, what you need. Then they use that knowledge not to love you better, but to control you more effectively. They turn your strengths into vulnerabilities. Your empathy becomes a weakness they exploit. Your loyalty becomes a chain they use to bind you. Every trick in this list shares a common purpose: to transfer power from you to them, to make your reality bend to their will, to ensure that your life serves their needs while your own go unmet. And the most sophisticated manipulation makes you believe you chose this, that you're staying because you want to, that you're complying because it makes sense. The truly terrifying thing about dark psychology isn't that it exists. It's that once you've been subjected to enough of it, you don't even recognize it anymore. The manipulation becomes your normal. The control feels like love. The abuse looks like care. You've been so thoroughly conditioned that you've become complicit in your own captivity. But knowing these tricks exists is the first step to freedom. Recognition breaks the spell. Once you can name what's happening, you can start to resist it. And once you resist, you can escape. These 100 tricks are powerful, but knowledge is more powerful. Awareness is more powerful. Your choice to stop accepting manipulation is more powerful. The manipulator's greatest fear is that you'll wake up, that you'll see clearly, that you'll recognize these tricks for what they are, and that you'll walk away. So wake up, see clearly, and remember, you don't have to play games you didn't consent to. You don't have to stay in situations that harm you. You don't have to accept love that looks like control or care that feels like captivity. You deserve better. And the moment you truly believe that is the moment these 100 tricks stop working.